May the Lord give you happiness. Christmas Message 1967, The Solar Bodies. Book written by Samael Aun Weor. Chapter 1. Atlantis. Beloved Gnostic brethren, on this Christmas night of 1967, we are going to start our Christic message by remembering the very ancient, submerged continent of Atlantis. The priests of Sais in the ancient Egypt of the pharaohs told Solon that Atlantis had been destroyed 9,000 years before having had that conversation with him. On a Mayan manuscript preserved in the British Museum, the following can literally be read: in the year 6 Can in the 11th Mulek, in the month Zak, there occurred terrible earthquakes, which continued without interruption until the 13th Chen. The country of the hills of mud, the Atlantean land, was sacrificed, being twice upheaved it suddenly disappeared during the night, the basin being continually shaken by volcanic forces. Being confined, these caused the land to sink and rise several times and in various places. At last the surface gave away and 10 countries were torn asunder and scattered. Unable to stand the force of the convulsions, they sank with their 64 million inhabitants 8,000 years before this book was written. The famous Dr. Heinrich Schliemann, who had the high honor of discovering the ruins of ancient Troy, found within the treasure of Priam a strange jar with a peculiar shape upon it. Upon it appears a written phrase with Phoenician characters, which textually says, "From King Kronos of Atlantis." It is interesting to note that jars very similar to those found in Priam's treasure were also found amongst the unburied objects in Tiwanaku, Central America. Certain coins were found within these mysterious jars when they were intentionally broken for scientific purposes. Upon these coins the following phrase could easily be read, emitted in the Temple of the Transparent Walls. Esoterically speaking, we must state that any temple of mysteries, any Gnostic Lamigial, is in fact a temple of transparent walls with the starry infinite as its ceiling. However, the cited temple mentioned upon the mysterious coins was the National Atlantean Treasures Office. In the archives of the ancient Buddhist temple of Lhasa, a very ancient Chaldean inscription can still be read, one that was written 2,000 years before Christ. It states, "When the ball star dropped to the right where there is nothing more than sky and sea, the 7 cities trembled and worried with their gold towers and transparent temples, as the leaves of trees do during a storm. A torrent of fire fell over the palace. Cries from dying persons and moans in the crowd filled the air. The people went to find a hiding place in the temples and in the castles. So the wise Mu, great priest of Ramu, stood up and said, 'Didn't I predict all this to come?' Men and women, dressed with their precious clothes, covered with precious stones, begged, 'Mu, save us.' Mu answered, 'You will die, with your slaves and your treasures. From your ashes new people will come. If these people forget that they should not amass material things not only for their own progress, but also for the generosity towards mankind, the same fate will surprise them.' Tradition states that the flames in the fog choked the words of Mu. In a few months, the country and its inhabitants were smashed and swallowed in the abysms of the ocean. Our boastful modern civilization has not yet surpassed the Atlantean civilization. The Atlanteans also knew about atomic energy and utilized it in times of peace as well as in times of war. Atlantean science had a tremendous advantage because it was 100 gleaming sea nymphs around him. While its inhabitants remained loyal to the religion of their forefathers, fulfilling the precepts of the god Neptune, and not violating law and order, the Atlantean cities flourished. Yet, when they profaned sacred things, when they abused sex, when they stained themselves with the 7 capital sins, then they were punished and submerged with all of their wealth into the bottom of the ocean. The priests of Sais said unto Solon, 'All bodies moving in the heavens around the earth suffer perturbations that cause great conflagrations of things upon the earth. This recurs after long intervals. Of the many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes, the greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire.' The Atlantean continent extended and oriented itself towards the austral regions and the most elevated areas towards the septentrional ones. Its mountains exceeded in grandiosity, elevation, and quantity to all those that presently exist. The universal flood's history can be found within the traditions of all human races, and all are just simply recollections of the great Atlantean catastrophe. All of the religious teachings from primeval America, such as the sacred cults of the Incas, Mayans, and Aztecs, as well as the gods and goddesses of the ancient Greeks, Phoenicians, Scandinavians, Hindustanis, etc., have Atlantean origins. It is urgent to know, it is necessary to comprehend, that the gods and goddesses cited by Homer in his Iliad and Odyssey were heroes, kings, and queens of Atlantis. All of the ancient populaces venerated and worshipped those holy gods who lived in Atlantis and who now inhabit the Empyrean. America was geographically united with the Old World, Europe and Africa, through Atlantis. The ancient Indo-American civilizations have an Atlantean origin. The Egyptian, Incan, Mayan, etc. religions were the primeval religions of the Atlanteans. The Phoenician alphabet, father of all the famous European alphabets, has its origin in an ancient Atlantean alphabet. The latter was correctly transmitted from the Atlanteans to the Mayans. All the Egyptian and Mayan symbols and hieroglyphs come from the same Atlantean source. This is the only way that the similitude of these alphabets can be explained. Indeed, the similarity is too enormous to even consider that it is an outcome of chance. Ancient traditions affirm that the Atlanteans had a metal more precious than gold. This was the famous orichalcum. The catastrophe that finished with Atlantis was frightful. Undoubtedly, the outcome of the violation of the law is always catastrophic. Chapter 2. The Aryan Root Race. The epoch of Atlantis' submersion was indeed an era of many geological changes. During that time, other landmasses surfaced from within the profound bosom of the immense sea to become new islands and new continents. Some Atlantean survivors searched for refuge on the small continent of Grabontzi, present-day Africa. This continent increased in size and extension because other landmasses, which had surfaced from within neighboring seas, were added onto it. In ancient times, the Gulf of Mexico was a beautiful valley. The Antilles Islands, Canary Islands, and Spain are pieces of the submerged Atlantis. Today, the ancient Kolhidius Sea is known as the Caspian Sea. It was situated in the northeast of the then newly formed continent of Ashhartk, which is present-day Asia. The coasts of the Caspian Sea were formed by those lands that had surfaced from within the ocean and joined the continent of Asia. Asia, the Caspian Sea, and the entire block of that land together is presently known as the Caucasus. Such a block of land, in those times, was named Frank-Sinarali and later on Kolhidishi. However, in this day and age, as we already stated, it is the Caucasus. In those times of yore, a great river that fertilized the whole rich land of Tildiamis flowed into the Caspian Sea. The river at that time was known as Oxysurgia. This river still exists, however, it no longer flows into the Caspian Sea due to a secondary tremor that deviated it towards the right. The rich volume of water from such river violently precipitated itself through the most depressing zone of the Asiatic continent, thus originating the small Aral Sea. However, the very ancient river bed of that old river, which is currently named Amu Darya, can still be seen as a sacred testimony of the flow of the centuries. Atlantis passed through terrible and frightful catastrophes before it totally disappeared. The first catastrophe happened more or less 800,000 years ago. The second catastrophe occurred 200,000 years ago. The third catastrophe took place about 11,000 years ago. People have more or less befuddled memories of this latter catastrophe and its deluge. After the third great catastrophe that finished off Atlantis, all of the cities and towns of the ancient country of Tikliamis, with its formidable capital situated on the shores of that river that flowed into the Caspian Sea, which later originated the Aral Sea, was covered by sand, and today remains as only a desert. During those epochs unknown to Caesar Cantu and his universal history, another beautiful country existed, known as Meropliacy. This country traded with Tikliamis, and a very strong commercial competition existed between them. Later on, the country of Meropliacy changed its name to Gob land due to the great city of Gob. Gobland and its powerful city were swallowed up by the sands of the desert. So, within the sands of the Gobi Desert, many wealthy Atlantean treasures are hidden as well as powerful machines that are unknown by the populaces of this Aryan root race. Once in a while, the sands leave all of those treasures exposed, yet, nobody dares to touch them, because the one who tries is instantaneously killed by the gnomes who guard them. Only the human beings of the future sixth root race will know of these treasures, based upon the condition that they behave upright. Many pearl tradesmen from Atlantis were saved by taking refuge in Pearland, a country that is known in this day and age as India. The Atlanteans were the ones who built the pyramids of the Egyptians and Aztecs. The Atlanteans were the ones who founded the Inca civilization, the ones who established the mysteries in India, China, Egypt, Yucatan, etc. The Atlantean root race disappeared, swallowed up by the sea. Such a race had 7 subraces. The last of these subraces, the 7th subrace, corresponds to the survivors of the Great Tragedy. The seed of our Aryan root race is Nordic. When the Nordics mixed themselves with the Atlantean survivors, they gave origin to all of the subraces of our Aryan root race. The first Aryan subrace flourished in Central Asia. The second Aryan subrace flourished in India and the entire south of Asia. The third Aryan subrace created the powerful civilizations of Babylon, Chaldea, Egypt, etc. The fourth Aryan subrace developed itself in Greece, Rome. The fifth Aryan subrace is made up of the Anglo-Saxon and Teutonic populace. The great authors of modern anthropogenesis such as H.P.B., Rudolf Steiner, Max Heindel, and others, committed the very lamentable mistake of supposing that in their epoch they were in the 5th Aryan subrace of the 5th Aryan root race, as if the Latin American people did not exist. As if the Latin American were also Anglo-Saxon or Teutonic, or something of the sort. It is an absurdity to ignore the racial phenomenon of Latin America. By all means, it is logical to see that from the mixture of the Spanish conquistadors with the Indo-American tribes, we get as a matter of fact and by its own right, a new Aryan subrace, that is, the 6th branch of the Aryan trunk. The labor of forming the 6th Aryan subrace in the Red Native Skin Territory, USA, was more difficult because instead of mixing themselves with the native indigenous people, the English conquerors destroyed them, they assassinated them. Thus, in North America an insignificant amount of blood mixing was performed between the two peoples, causing enormous difficulty for the formation of the 6th Aryan subrace. Therefore, the occult fraternity who governs the fate of the world foresaw the necessity of converting the North American territory into the melting crucible of all races. This is why all of the races of the world are integrating within the United States. The authors of anthropogenesis and occultism should not ignore that the 6th Aryan subrace was easily formed in Latin America. The 7th Aryan subrace is the last to exist. The 7th Aryan subrace will exist until the end and will be among the survivors of the great new cataclysm that will very soon destroy this Aryan root race. Powerful spiritual civilizations from the first Aryan subrace existed in those kingdoms of Central Asia, in the countries of Gobland, Maripliacy, etc., which were situated in the heart of Asia and that presently have vanished. In the Himalayas, around the country of Tibet, only their ruins exist. Formidable esoteric cultures and tremendous civilizations existed in Pearland, the sacred land of the Vedas, the ancient Hindustan, as well as in the entire regions of southern Asia where the second Aryan subrace developed. Babylon, before its decadence, Chaldea and its ancient mysteries, Egypt and its pyramids, were all scenarios of very rich and powerful civilizations created by the third Aryan subrace. Athens, the great city founded by the goddess Athena, Rome, before its degeneration and destruction, were the marvelous scenarios where the powerful civilizations of the 4th Aryan subrace developed. The First and Second World Wars, with all of their barbarism and moral corruption, aimed their accusatory fingers at the men and women of the 5th Aryan subrace. South America is the scenario of the 6th Aryan subrace since their cousins, the gringos from North America, are still extremely Anglo-Saxon by majority. Presently, instead of evolving, the Aryan root race has devolved, and its corruption is worse than that of the Atlantean root race. The Aryan root race's malignity is so great that it has reached unto heaven. Therefore, this Aryan root race will be destroyed, so that Ramu's prophecy, which he uttered before the submergence of Atlantis, will be fulfilled. If these people forget that they should not amass material things, not only for their own progress, but also for the generosity towards mankind, the same fate will surprise them. Chapter 3. The New Catastrophe. Beloved Gnostic brethren, on this Christmas of 1967, it is urgent that we all very judiciously study and analyze this tremendous moment in which we are living. It is indeed impossible to deny that we presently live in moments of global crisis. In the history of our Aryan root race, there have never been such terrible moments. Woes and weeping are heard everywhere. Executions are occurring the world over. Unhappy people remember their beloved relatives with supreme anguish as they waste the last moments of their life in hard labor camps, widows with children who die of starvation, etc. The entire earth is filled with armies and wars. Rumors of wars are heard everywhere. The present chaos is awful. Nonetheless, the tyrants, while seated on their blasphemous thrones, uselessly intend to establish a new order based upon blood and drugs. Paris, as a great harlot, continues wallowing in its filthy bed of pleasures. London has become a new Sodom. It even intends to establish the legal bond of matrimony between homosexuals. The United States of America has fallen into a collective madness, because they have not only destroyed other countries, but moreover, they are also destroying their own. China, the venerable China of Confucius and Lao Tse, has fallen as a prostitute in the arms of Marxism-Leninism. China has imported a corrupted doctrine from the Western world. Nonetheless, they have declared themselves enemies of the West. The Third World War is inevitable because the ones who planned and performed the First and Second World Wars are already working very actively in order to make the Third World War a reality. The Third World War will be millions of times more horrible than the two former world wars. Any sense of pity has disappeared. Today it is considered a luxury to have a heart of stone, a flint-stone heart. Many schools and colleges teach their pupils that charity is weakness and that they must never give alms. This is how the students become perverse and cruel while sitting at their desks in school. The moral epidemic of the so-called rebels without a cause fell upon the entire humanity after the Second World War. These rebels are the children of the New Age who without God and without law go around organizing gangs. Everywhere and anywhere they go about killing, hurting, raping, getting drunk, etc., and the governments cannot control them. The gravest part of these rebels without a cause is their state of absolute moral irresponsibility. When they are taken in front of the tribunals, they do not know why they have killed, why they have hurt others, and worst of all is that they don't even care to know why. The sublime world of art has reached the maximum degree of degeneration. The temple of art has been converted into a whorehouse. It has become a brothel where homosexuals, drug addicts, alcoholics, harlots, assassins, thieves, etc. search for refuge. Human corruption is so great that even homicide has become an art form. Moreover, the breaking point of madness is the fact that there presently exist organizations for assassins and an abundant amount of literature on the art of assassination. All branches of present-day art acknowledge lust, alcoholism, drugs, homosexuality, blood, horror. In this day and age, classical composers are seen with infinite despite. To play Beethoven or Mozart in any modern festivity signifies the general withdrawal of the guests. The four blasphemous clowns, the Beatles, from the degenerated music of England, were endowed with the mark of distinction by the Queen of that empire. The idiotic multitudes even kissed the ground that they walked upon. Everywhere there abundantly exists assassinations, robberies, infanticides, matricides, parricides, uxoricides, assaults, rapes, genocides, prostitution, hatred, vengeance, sorcery, merchants of souls and merchants of bodies, greed, violence, envy, pride, arrogance, gluttony, love of luxury, slander, etc. Indeed, the Aryan root race is a rotten fruit, a fruit that will fall from the tree of life by the weight of its own rottenness. The students of occultism fill themselves with infinite horror when they examine the history of Atlantis in the Akashic records of nature. However, the Atlanteans had religion. In that sense, they were less degenerated than the henchmen of Marxism-Leninism who hate any religious principle to death. The initiates are filled with an unutterable psychic terror when they remember that woman with the seductive and malignant beauty, the Queen Catebet of the gloomy destinies from ancient Atlantis. With sovereignty, she governed the South States and the powerful city of the gates of gold of that submerged continent. Indeed, amongst the Borgia and Medici's family history there does not exist a similar perversity as that of Queen Catebet. She captivated with her malignant beauty and necromancy. She fascinated and seduced princes and kings with her enchantments. In her honor, many maidens and children were immolated to the tenebrous entities of the inner underworlds. In those times, the Atlantean sacerdotal medicine discovered what in this day and age we would scientifically call human apotherapy, that is, the infusion of glandular juices from the pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, etc., to sick and caducous organisms. The priest-physicians did not only utilize the chemistry of the endocrine glands as hormones and juices, but moreover, they also utilized the hyperchemistry of such glands or the psychic vital fluids of the chakras or magnetic centers of the human organism, which are intimately related with the endocrine centers. After having taken their immolated victims away from the sacrificial stones, the cadavers were transferred to certain secret chambers where the priest-physicians extracted the precious endocrine glands that were so indispensable in the preservation of the fatal queen's body. Her youthful beauty, with all of her enchantments, lasted for many centuries. The most frightening of all of this was the moment in which the priests, after having secretly extracted the glands from the cadaver, would toss away the rest of the cadaver to the fanatical and corrupted crowds who would devour it hungrily. This is how the Atlantean populace became anthropophagi. When we reflect upon all of these things, we feel terrified, horrified. However, all of these barbaric acts are minor, even ridiculous when compared with the atrocities of the First and Second World Wars. Atlantean barbarity seems comical when compared with the monstrous explosion of the atomic bomb in the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. All of the Atlantean barbarities are insignificant when we compare them to the gas chambers where millions of men, women, children, and elders were stripped of their clothing and died with the most frightening desperation. We felt horrified by Atlantean bestiality, but the bombarding of the martyred city of London, the concentration camps, the wall shootings, the hangings, the cities destroyed by the criminal bombs, sicknesses, hunger, and desperation were all millions of times worse. Never in the history of the centuries was such a great perversity felt than that of this caducous and degenerated Aryan root race. The breaking point of all of this evilness is that now the Tower of Babel has been lifted in order to conquer the infinite space. If that which is divine does not interfere with what we call the conquest of outer space, then in a short time, the terrestrial hordes will assault Mars, Venus, Mercury, etc., and all of the crimes, such as those performed by Hernán Cortés in Mexico or by Pizarro in Peru, will be repeated again on those inhabited planets. If that which has no name, if that which is the reality, the divine, does not interfere now, then that will become an accomplice of the crime. This Aryan humanity is symbolized in the Book of Revelation as the great human harlot, a woman dressed in purple and scarlet colors, whose number is 666. So, in the world of absurdity, there is nothing more absurd than to suppose, for at least a brief moment, that this great human harlot would conquer other inhabited planets with her famous rockets and would crown herself queen and sovereign of the infinite space. Therefore, the new catastrophe which will doom this Aryan root race is totally just and absolutely indispensable. Chapter 4. Dangerous Symptoms. Eminent men of science from the famous University of Columbia have made available to the world the alarming news that the fatal source of the diverse telluric commotions of former years are monstrous faults that exist in the bottom of the seas. The men of science calculate that these oceanic faults form a fissure about 90,000 kilometers in length, with a middle width of 40 kilometers and an average profundity of 2.5 kilometers. We were told that an elder Tibetan Lama, before dying, warned a certain gentleman about such oceanic cracks. Without a doubt, the Lamas do not ignore this fact. Scientific information states that these oceanic faults stretch from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean and from the Antarctic Ocean until the Arctic Ocean. These faults surround the American continent as well as the Asiatic continent, thus leaving, in the center of such frightening ring of submarine faults, the entire Pacific Ocean. The last investigation performed by scientists has demonstrated that these oceanic cracks depart from Antarctica and continue on very close to Cape Horn, where they diverge into two principal fissures, one that goes towards the east and the other which goes towards the west. The Pacific Ocean's fissure follows a very sinuous trajectory, almost bordering the American continent along the coastlines of Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, Oaxaca and Guerrero, Mexico, Californian Gulf and Seattle, USA, Vancouver, Canada, and Alaska. This oceanic fissure splits in Alaska and continues its course along the Aleutian Islands. Another crack seems to pass through Alaska. The earthquakes in Fairbanks, situated in the center of that peninsula, have been very strong, such as the one that occurred in March 1964. The oceanic fissure of the Aleutian Islands goes towards Tokyo, Japan, dangerously touching the islands of Sapporo, Hokkaido, Oahu, Waiwa, Kawailoa, and some others. A wise author states that some secondary fissures depart from Japan and go towards Hawaii. There is no doubt that the main crack goes towards the Philippines and New Zealand, and from there it returns to its point of departure situated in Antarctica. Thus, in this way, a tremendously dangerous magic circle is closed. There is no doubt that the fissure that goes towards the eastern world starts in mysterious Antarctica and then passes in front of the Cape of Good Hope, Madagascar, and the Arabian Sea in order to end in some unknown place in the Indian Ocean. Men of science state that the Atlantic Fault seems to have its origin in the Norwegian Sea. The extremely enigmatic course of this Atlantic Fault passes by the coastline of Spain, Portugal, and part of Africa and then ends close to the Portuguese Guinea. By all means, it is clear that the most dangerous oceanic fault that inevitably will generate a tremendous cataclysm is the Ring of Fire in the Pacific Ocean. The news that constantly circulates in the newspapers around the world has confirmed that the lands which are most punished by earthquakes are precisely in the Pacific Ocean. These cracks in the maritime floor are dangerous symptoms that, without a doubt, are warning us of the proximity of a great tragedy. The times of the end have arrived, and we are in them. The sword of the cosmic justice menacingly weighs upon the head of the great harlot, humanity. It is urgent to know that an entire system of cracks exists in the profundity of the seas, and that these are the concrete outcome of a totally defined planetary type of geological action. Already, some of those cracks are indeed so deep that they even have made the exterior waters of the oceans contact the interior fire, magma, of the Earth. In this moment of global crisis, water vapor is being produced under such intense pressure within our planetary organism that indeed the day will come in which any mountain, no matter how powerful it may be, will not resist this pressure and will burst asunder, snatched in the air and made to dust, as has already been prophesied by Muhammad in the Quran. A series of earthquakes have already begun and will only become more and more intense. The cities, like houses made out of a deck of cards, will fall and turn into dust. Earthquakes will swallow up this entire humanity. We must recognize the fact that this humanity is doomed. There is no remedy for this humanity, therefore it must perish. For the moment, as a testimony of this imminent great catastrophe, it is already undeniable that the coast of Chile is sinking and that other diverse lands from this afflicted and martyrized planet are similarly sinking. Experts know very well that the sea has lost profundity in diverse parts of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. This is due to the fact that the bottom of the ocean floor has been continuously rising up towards the surface as a result of the internal swelling of the marine floor created by the steam's pressure. Scientists know very well that while the mountains sink, the sea's floor is rising. Without a doubt, great volumes of water are now in contact with the liquid fire, magma, that runs through the interior of the Earth. Thus, the outcome will happen without delay. The steam's pressure has inevitably produced an intensive volcanic activity in conjunction with terrible and frightening earthquakes and seaquakes. The pressure of the interior of the Earth is horrific, and worst of all, as each minute passes the pressure increases. The culminating moment is approaching, the moment when the internal pressure reaches its maximum limit. The catastrophe is about to happen. Any exterior phenomenon can generate this culminating doom: an atomic explosion, the passing of an outer space body extremely close to the Earth, an appropriately combined solar and lunar attraction phenomenon, etc. The explosion in the bottom of the seas will be frightful. The sun will become as black as a sackcloth of hair, and the moon will become as red as blood due to the reflection of the fire, magma, that will surface upon the face of the Earth. The terrible sword of Damocles menacingly appears upon the head of the great harlot, whose number is 666. The sins of the great harlot have reached unto heaven, and the flaming sword of cosmic justice will wound this humanity to death. Babylon the Great, this present humanity, mother of all types of fornication and abominations of the earth, will fall, for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. This perverse civilization of vipers, this great Babylon, will burn with fire, because it has become millions of times more corrupt than Atlantis. This great Babylon, this abominable modern civilization, has become the habitat of devils, the den of every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hateful bird. The world is now shaken by earthquakes. These are dangerous indicators of a great tragedy that announces a worse catastrophe and various other catastrophes thousands of times worse than those which finished off Atlantis. Chapter 5. Atomic Science. The atom is in itself a miniature universe. All of the mechanical processes that are performed within the deepness of the atom are also performed within our solar system. Atomic investigations have verified that in the exterior regions of the atom there exists a cloud of electrons with an authentic negative electric charge, which when dissociated from the atom's agglomerate in dense floods in order to form all of the electric currents. The atom has been abundantly investigated, and its marvels are astonishing. The nucleus, positively charged, is the vital center of this small spherical world. As the planets gravitate around the sun, likewise the electrons gravitate around that mysterious nucleus. Without a doubt, the atomic nucleus possesses a considerable electric charge which the nucleus utilizes in order to retain under its domain the whole cortege of peripheral electrons, yet at a respectable distance. The nucleus is the same heart of the atom, and it is already foreseen that within that basic, fundamental, nuclear corpuscle, a vital mechanism must exist that is still up for discussion and further investigation. The whole reason for the atom, miniature universe, to be is found within its nucleus. The whole inheritance of the atom and its potential resides precisely in its nucleus. The atom can explode, or on the contrary, it can be changed into other types of atoms, thanks to this central corpuscle. At this moment, physicists admit two fundamental constituents of the nucleus, the proton and the neutron. By all means, it is absolutely clear that the proton is the hydrogen's basic nucleus. In other words, it is the most central part of the hydrogen, which is the lightest and simplest of all known elements. The scientist Prout admitted in his time that the different elements of nature are condensations formed by the simplest of elements, hydrogen. There exist 12 fundamental types of hydrogen. They correspond to 12 categories of matter that are contained in the universe from the absolute down to the infernal worlds. The infernal worlds are symbolized in the Divine Comedy by Dante. They are situated within the submerged mineral kingdom in the interior of the earth. It is also interesting to study the second constituent of the atomic nucleus. This is the neutron that has the same weight of the proton. In other words, it has the same weight of the nucleus of the hydrogen. Nonetheless, until now it differs from all of the particles known by conventional science. It is indeed intriguing that it has no electrical charge. Since it is a neutral corpuscle, this is why it is called neutron. The Gnostics, after having discovered the three aspects of electric energy, and after having classified those three modes of electricity with the following terms, positive, negative, and neutral, have considered the neutron as a corpuscle with neutral electrical charge. Our statement about the neutron charged with electricity in a neutral and static state might not appear very clear for modern scientists. But sooner or later they will have to prove it. One of the greatest enigmas for modern atomic science is the enigma of the electrons. If the intimate mechanism of the atomic nucleus is still unknown, much less is the intimate mechanism of the electron known. There exist positive and negative electrons. This is no longer a secret for scientists. Nevertheless, they do not know anything about the intimate mechanism of the electron. The intellectual animal mistakenly called a human being has achieved the fractioning of the atom in order to liberate energy. Yet, fortunately, they still do not know the internal mechanism of the electron within which resides tremendous power. It is estimated that each time a positive electron is absorbed while penetrating platinum, it produces 2 photons of 0.5 volts each. This corresponds to a production of 1 million volts of photonic energy per positive electron. The active element of the Sun is hydrogen, and indeed. This is very interesting because the atom of the hydrogen, with a single electron rotating around a nucleus, is found at the border between the matter in an electronic state and the matter in a molecular state. When hydrogen combines with denser matter and other matter, atoms combine with atoms for the construction of molecules. The outcome of a superior state of the superior rarefaction of hydrogen releases free electrons or matter in an electronic state, light, magnetic waves, etc. By making use of the coveted uranium, modern scientists have separated one electron from one atom whose density is not natural, which is almost pathologic. They have had an indisputable success. Thus, it is logical to state that in this way, they have liberated an incomparable superior power of atomic energy that until now the human mind could not have conceived. Thereafter, by combining atoms of hydrogen, the scientists cunningly managed to form atoms of themselves. Through this process, they thus produced frightful energy of practically unlimited power. Undoubtedly, the atomic bomb is millions of times more terrible than dynamite. However, it is less horrific than the hydrogen bomb. Prostitution of solar energy exists in the hydrogen bomb. This is the worst quality of black magic whose outcome will be total devastation and the decline and lifelessness of all living material on a totally new scale. If a hydrogen bomb were to explode in the superior regions of the atmosphere, where the deposit of pure hydrogen is found, then the whole planet Earth would be burned by living fire and every creature would perish as would every other form of life. By wanting to use atomic energy, by intending to discover the entire science of the transmutation of atoms or the way and manner in which one atom is changed into another, the intellectual animal longs to enter into the world where matter has all possibilities. However, he wants to enter through a false door. The intellectual animal wants to use the scientific laws without any code of ethics, without having an awakened consciousness, without having reached true spirituality. We, the Gnostics, have legitimate procedures in order to enter into the mysterious world, where matter has infinite possibilities, into those atomic, molecular, and electronic regions where all of the processes of universal life are gestated. At this present moment, atomic radiation has altered the superior layer of the terrestrial atmosphere. If atomic explosions continue, soon the atmosphere will not be able to filter and analyze the solar rays in order to transform them into light and heat. Thus, we will see the sun as black as a sackcloth of hair. Earthquakes will intensify as long as the superior layer of the atmosphere continues to be altered due to atomic explosions, because on our planet Earth, this atmospheric layer is the provider of life. The air that we breathe and the water that we drink is already charged with atomic radiation, and instead of being improved, this situation will only go from bad to worse. Therefore, when the atomic war explodes, we will see dantesque scenes everywhere. People will lose their minds due to the abuse of atomic energy, and hospitals will be filled with grief and there will be no relief. From under the surface of the Earth, atomic explosions are liberating from the infernal worlds the submerged mineral element, infernal matters, abysmal atoms, such as the following: neptunium, 93, plutonium, 94, americium, 95, and curium, 96. The outcome of this blasphemy is already before our eyes. A trio of matter, energy, and consciousness exist inside every atom. Therefore, diabolic consciousness or a terribly malignant intelligence exists within these types of already mentioned abysmal atoms. These atomic demons are already poisoning the weak minds of people. This is why life in these great cities have become frightfully criminal, monstrous, horrible, chilling, and terribly malignant. Soon, everywhere in our neighborhoods and streets, we will hear wailing, howling, whistles, neighs, squeaks, bellows, gaggles, meows, barking, snorts, snoring, and croaks. We are in the times of the end. Chapter 6. Nature's Warnings. In these moments of global crisis, scientists have discovered with astonishment that the magnetic pole of the compass does not coincide with the physical North Pole of the Earth. One thing is the magnetic pole, and another is the physical pole. Without a doubt, the axes of the Earth are now modifying their inclination. Consequently, every minute the poles are consecutively deviating towards the equator. These very remarkable geological changes have an exclusively cosmic origin. However, these can be accelerated by the scientific madness of the intellectual animal through his atomic experiments or through the frightening explosions of the hydrogen bomb. Thus, in the manner that this impending doom is progressing, it is reasonable to be familiar with the idea of the revolution of the axis of the Earth as an inevitable catastrophe that will convert the poles into the equator and the latter into the poles. Where today only enormous icebergs exist, tomorrow enormous and profound equatorial jungles will exist and vice versa. The present equatorial lands will be the icebergs of the future. The revolution of the axis of the Earth is a natural cosmic phenomenon that can be accelerated by the scientific madness of the intellectual animal. In a very abrupt way, the revolution of the axis of the Earth finished off with the infamous Atlantis. It is very intriguing and significant that rain is falling on the Sahara Desert and in many other places where rain has not fallen before. It has been confirmed that the ice of the North Pole is melting. And the consequence of this phenomenon brings upon the terrible hurricanes and cyclones that are presently lashing out at the world. Let us remember the cyclones that lashed out against the coast of Sonora, Mexico, and Manzanillo in the Pacific Ocean, and all the other cyclones that have devastated Japan, the United States, etc. Earthquakes are now occurring in a continuous manner. These earthquakes are showing us that within the interior of this afflicted planet in which we live, the planetary fire has entered into terrible agitation. As soon as Turkey trembles, so does India today. North America trembles, and tomorrow Italy, Central America or South America, etc. Ancient volcanoes are like dormant lions that are beginning to awaken from their millenarian dreams and are beginning to roar. Let us call to mind Fuji in Japan, Etna, and many other volcanoes that exist. Let us remember how Vesuvius finished off Pompeii. Most intriguing of all is that the old lions are not the only ones that are awakening. Besides them, new volcanoes have been born, some with a fleeting life, others with a more powerful life. Let us mention, for instance, Paracutin in Mexico, and the other one in the cold and martyrized land of Siberia. With infinite astonishment, explorers have found lakes with warm water in the South Pole, lakes that are getting bigger and bigger as each day passes. Without a doubt, the growth of these lakes is due to very intense subterranean activity, whose development stretches far away. 3 volcanoes are now erupting in the South Pole. In Antarctica, they are spewing a very special type of rare lava. Nonetheless, some nations have now hurriedly placed their flags on that continent. How imprudent humanity is! All of these phenomena of Antarctica invite us to think. There is no doubt that the recent earthquakes of Chile, which also shook the bottom floor of the Pacific Ocean all the way to Japan, are intimately associated with the catastrophic processes of the South Pole. The final outcome of all of this has to be frightful. It has been proven in a definite way that in the Gulf of Guinea, which is located over the equator, there are certain water currents coming from the Atlantic Ocean that have been uncommonly warmed. These water currents flow in the well-known Gulf Stream towards the north. Here they have been secretly undermining the ice, fractioning the icebergs, which then travel in chunks towards the equator, in expedient urgency, in order to fill the emptiness left behind by extreme evaporation. There is no doubt that this creates a current inverse to the Gulf Stream. This inverse current is very cold and fundamentally alters the climate of the coastlines which it flows through. Thus, life is finally given to cyclones, hurricanes, terrible windstorms, torrential rains, and every type of climatologically disturbance which are presently causing great alarm to the whole human race. Profound investigations allow us to logically deduce that these uncommon waters which are being warmed up near the equator are intimately related with the volcanoes of Antarctica. By all means, it is clear to comprehend that the warm currents of the Pacific Ocean, as a final resort, come from Antarctica. These waters arrive at the Gulf of Guinea and create an elevation in the temperature of the equator. Common sense, as someone once said, should be the most common of the senses, allows us to comprehend that these currents of warmed water, when arriving at the North Pole, have to undermine and crack enormous icebergs, thus reducing, in the already mentioned Gulf Stream, those previously compact icebergs. The enigmatic volcanoes of the South Pole will intensify their igneous activities. Thus, consequently, the lakes with warm waters from Antarctica will grow excessively. Each day, the marine currents will become even hotter, and this will allow them to penetrate more and more powerfully within the solemn icebergs of the North Pole until eventually achieving the total meltdown of the ice. It will be an absurdity to suppose that the South Pole with its erupting volcanoes will remain in a non-modified state. It is clear that its ice will melt just as the ice of the North Pole, thus the outcome will be an apocalyptic horror. Logic makes us comprehend that when the polar ice has melted, the maritime waters will increase in volume, and that if the receptacle, the cup, the marine floor is not deep enough, then the waters shall have to spread out, to overflow, to inundate the lands, thus swallowing up entire countries. This is obvious. Let us remember what we already stated in this 1967 Christmas message. The sea has lost profundity in diverse parts of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, and the bottom of the ocean floor has been continuously rising up towards the surface. In other words, the profundity of certain seas have decreased. Without even the tiniest amount of fear of being found mistaken, we can asseverate with complete solemnity that the cause of this formidable marine crack is found in the volcanic activity of the South Pole. Based on what we have already stated in this chapter and former chapters, we can be certain that the Earth will return again to a primeval age where the existence of any kind of animal life will be impossible. The Nahuas, Aztec masters, said that the children of the first sun, the first root race of protoplasmic polar type, were devoured by tigers. The Aztecs said that the children of the second sun, the second root race, the Hyperboreans, were cleared away by strong hurricanes and converted themselves into apes or monkeys. The Aztecs said that the children of the third sun perished by the sun raining down fire upon them, and they transformed themselves into birds. The children of the third sun were the Lemurians, whose continent, situated in the Pacific Ocean, was destroyed by earthquakes and volcanoes. The Aztecs said that the children of the fourth sun, the fourth root race, were swallowed up by the waters, and they converted themselves into fish. The Aztecs said that the children of the fifth sun, we the Aryan root race, will perish by that which is called movement, earthquakes. The sacred scriptures of the Aztecs did not give any symbol to the degenerated humans of our present fifth root race as they did for the previous four root races. However, the Christian gospel gives the symbol of sheep for the saved ones and goats for almost all of the human beings of the Aryan root race. The Aztecs said that in the epoch of the children of the sixth sun, the future sixth root race, the gods will resurrect. The Nahuas, Aztecs masters, have prophesied ineffable things for the seventh root race, for the children of the seventh sun. Chapter 7. The Great Judge. The Hindustani sages cite the property in all of their sacred books. The property is that primordial substance from where the 12 basic fundamental hydrogens, which serve as foundations to the seven cosmos, emerge by successive condensations or crystallizations. Variety in its own depth is a unity, since tattvas, senses, mind and all of those other multiplicities of beings and things become diverse modes of crystallization of the primordial substance. The fire which blazes, the air which not a single living creature could exist without, the waters of the boisterous sea and the perfumed earth are condensed akash, materialized mula prakriti, and densified property. Mother space is therefore the primordial substance, the matter of the great work. Space's mother is the fertile bosom from which everything emerges and everything immerses. Let definitively be declared in this chapter, mother space is the same property of the Hindustani, the Divine Mother. The property is one, unique, indivisible and integral during the Pralaya, cosmic night. Yet, during the Mahamanvantara, cosmic day, as a consequence of the activity of the first, second and third logos, the property expands and builds up from herself in three aspects. The three modes of the property are, first, the unmanifested property. Second, the property in nature. Third, the property as queen of the infernos and death. The unmanifested property has no symbol amongst the Aztecs. The manifested property, nature, has the Aztec symbol of Tonatzin, the adorable mother. The Greeks symbolized this second aspect of the cosmic mother as the chaste Diana. Among the Aztecs, the third aspect of the Divine Mother is the terrible Kotlikue. Among the Egyptians she is Proserpine, and among the Greeks she is the tremendous Hecate, lady of enchantments and death. Mother space herself is the same Roman Appia, the Nordic Urwala, the Scandinavian Erda, the chivalrous Ergata, the primeval Sibyl of the earth. Any of the three aspects of the property can, if she wishes, take on a feminine shape in order to communicate something to any illuminated mystic. One summer night, I was in that state which is known in the Eastern world as Nirvikalpa or Samadhi. What happened to me during that meditation was very profound. It was something marvelous. Before me the third aspect of property took on the frightful and terribly divine shape of Proserpine or Hecate, and then she spoke to me in a language with apocalyptic signification. This perverse civilization of vipers, this great Babylon will be destroyed, and in all of its cities, one stone upon another will not remain. The evil of the world is so great that it has even reached onto heaven. There is no remedy for this humanity, it is totally lost. Then, overflowing with great terror, I uttered, "O mother of mine, we are on a dead-end street." Then with a parable Proserpine asked me, "Do you want to make a covenant with me?" "Yes, mother of mine, I am willing to fulfill that covenant." With great decisiveness this answer came from my lips. Then Proserpine, the queen of the infernos and death, took the floor again with a parable and told me, "Open the dead-end street, and I will kill them." I immediately answered, "I accept mother of mine, lady of mine." Then, certain upper-class ladies passed by in front of us. These ladies achieved the second birth. Thus, the solar light splendorously emanated from within their solar bodies. Unfortunately, these ladies had not dissolved the pluralized I, nor had they eliminated their lunar bodies. I saluted them, yet they did not answer, and full of pride they did not even prostrate themselves with reverence before the Divine Mother. They still have pride, and this is because they still carry within themselves the remnants of the great harlot whose number is 666. This was the only thing that occurred to me to say. The Divine Mother answered, "I have to examine all of them." Evidently, she was referring to the twice-born of this epoch in which we live. Certain gentlemen also dressed with solar bodies passed by in front of us, yet contrary to the former ladies, they inclined themselves and were filled with profound reverence and respect for the Divine Mother and my insignificant person who has no value. "These are children of the sun," exclaimed the Cosmic Mother. Afterwards, I entered into a period of profound reflection. If some of the twice-born must still be rigorously examined, then what fate lies ahead for the great harlot? What then would be the fate that lies ahead for this lunar race? It is obvious that all confessional religions are awaiting the final judgment of this humanity, of this degenerated and perverse lunar race. Yet, according to the chronology of the Great Pyramid of Egypt, the last judgment already occurred between the years 1946 and 1953. We, the Gnostics, know by illumination and direct transcendental experience that the judgment of all nations occurred in the year 1950. The holy gods judged the great harlot, humanity, and they considered it unworthy. The sentence of the gods was, "To the abyss. To the abyss. To the abyss." It is interesting that during the epoch of the judgment of the nations, 1946 to 1953, according to the measurements of the Great Pyramid of Egypt, an enigmatic subterranean chamber ends in a rocky, obscure, dead-end chamber. Obviously, through this dead-end chamber, the wise constructors of the Great Pyramid of Egypt wanted to tell us that after the final judgment humanity will enter into the infernal worlds, which Dante found within the interior of the earth. The apocalypses of St. John, Revelation 20:11-15, refer to the great judgment, and I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of El, and the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged every man according to his works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. All the symbolism of the Great Pyramid of Egypt starts when one treads upon the great step. Afterwards, the first lower passage becomes clear when you begin walking, and the remarkable date August 4-5, 1914 appears. This symbolism continues until one reaches the entrance of the king's chamber. The date September 15th to 16th, 1939 is marked with complete precision. It is overwhelming to find that these two terrible dates, related with the First and Second World Wars, are found in the geometry and chronology of the Great Pyramid. What is most intriguing about all of this is that due to their construction and form, it is not possible to pass through these cited passages standing on the feet. In order to walk through it is necessary to use the four limbs, like the quadruped animals. This reminds us of the soldiers who walk on their hands and knees or who drag themselves, like animals, in the fields of battle. According to the Great Pyramid, our epoch has to pass through three periods: death, preoccupation, and chaos. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake those days shall be shortened. Matthew 24 verses 15, 21, 22. Since the First World War, the former prophecy is being fulfilled in a dramatic way. The geometrical measurements of the Great Pyramid point towards the First World War, towards the interval between the First and the Second Wars, towards the year 1939 with the dates 15-16 of September, marking the beginning of the Second World War. And it also tells of the duration for each one of these great wars. Finally, in the chamber of the judgments of nations, the Great Pyramid places humanity in front of the Great Judge. The King's Chamber ends on the date 19 to 20 of August 1953. Now, the doom that lies ahead is work for Proserpine. She will terminate this entire humanity. Chapter 8. The Submerged Mineral Kingdom. The ray of creation begins in the absolute and ends in the inferno. The latter word comes from the Latin infernus, which means inferior. An author, whose name I do not wish to mention, stated that the inferior place is this physical world, this cellular world in which we live. Lamentably, that author was mistaken because the infernus is the underworld, the submerged mineral kingdom. Dante discovered the inferno within the interior of the earth, the underworld of the earth. The descent towards the profound interior of our planetary organism is a descent into places of extreme density, of extreme materiality. Indeed, this is the wise idea expressed by Dante in his Divine Comedy. Dante sees the underworld, he analyzes it, he comprehends it, and he formidably describes it. Dante talked about spheres, or circles, of an increasing density that lead, according to his own worlds, toward the middle, at whose point unites all heavy substance. That point to which from every part is dragged all heavy substance. At the threshold of a door in hell, Dante saw, written in black letters, the following terrible words. Through me you pass into the city of woe. Through me you pass into eternal pain. Through me among the people lost for aye. Just as the founder of my fabric moved. To rear me was the task of power divine, supremest wisdom, and primeval love. Before me things create were none, save things eternal, and eternal I endure. All hope abandon, ye who enter here. The subterranean layers of the earth represent the kingdom of minerals, lithosphere. The kingdom of metals is the barysphere that envelopes a heart of incredible density and frightful inertia. We must make a clear distinction between the mineral kingdom and the kingdom of metals. Among minerals, the group of metals is a cosmic separated group. A little bit beyond the kingdom of metals there exists a certain very rare type of matter that has closer contact with the Absolute. We must comprehend profoundly that the Almighty Holy One abides behind the kingdom of metals. The ray of creation begins in the Absolute and ends in the Inferno. But what is beyond the Inferno? It is clear that beyond the Inferno, behind the kingdom of metals, the Absolute is found. Music clarifies all of this. As a complete process of life, the ray of creation is a descendant octave in which do passes to T and T passes to La, etc. With one law, the Absolute vibrates within the note do of the musical scale. From the great scale, the note T resounds in all of the worlds of the infinite with their 3 laws. The note La vibrates in all the suns of the galaxy with their 6 laws. The note Sol resounds in the sun that illuminates us with its 12 laws. All the planets of our solar system vibrate with the note Fa, which resounds in all of nature with their 24 laws. On Earth, the microcosm vibrates with the note Mi and its 48 laws. The underearth or underworld vibrates with the note Re. The ray of creation ends in the underworld. Beyond the kingdom of metals is the Absolute with its note Do vibrating eternally. Therefore, the Inferno with its 96 laws and its note Re is the end of the ray of creation. 7 orders of worlds exist within the ray of creation. The Inferno is the 7th, the last one. Happiness and spirituality increase in worlds which are governed by a small number of laws, yet the complication of life, the mechanization, the materiality and grief, increases in worlds governed by a large number of laws. The Inferno governed by 96 laws, which multiply according to the law of 3, is frightfully materialistic, horrible, and painful. The submerged mineral kingdom is Dante's Inferno with its 9 circles or regions. In the last circle is where the nucleus of the earth is found, where Dante, the good disciple of Virgil, discovered the foundation of Dis, the demon of treason. Indeed, the world is triple: the world, the underworld, and the superworld exist. The epidermis of the earth, this cellular region in which we live, is just the intermediate zone since the underworld, the Roman Averno, the Greek Tartarus, the Hades, Hellas, the Inferno of Dante or the infernal worlds, exists underneath the terrestrial crust. The Elysian fields of the superworld, the molecular and electronic kingdoms, the heavens, Deva, Amenti, paradise, etc., are all found above the cellular regions. Such is the beautiful Pythagorean symbolism of the 2 dried circles, the circle above or superworld and the circle below or underworld. A 3rd region is created, where the 2 intersect. This is the cellular world in which we live. The sun as the gigantic cosmic heart of our solar system illuminates not only the cellular region in which we live, but also the underworld and the superworld. The king star, the sun, does not only emit the luminous waves that we perceive with our eyes, but other millions of waves of different vibratory tonality that become, as a fact, an effective black light that human eyes cannot perceive. Fine laboratory devices inform us that 7 ultraviolet colors, whose obscure and spectral rays are clearly perceived by the photospectrography, exist above the violet color. Undoubtedly, some large amounts of chemical and even hyperchemical vibrations exist above the ultraviolet colors, as those which belong to our imagination, or those which belong to our mind, willpower, and feelings. On the other hand, scientists very well know that red, below the sun, emits calorific waves of the X-rays, electromagnetic, etc., that is a fact and without a doubt, would be clear light if human beings would have developed that 3rd eye of the limnoceles lucidity. A 3rd eye that is also cited by Homer in the Odyssey. Creatures that inhabit the profound depth of the oceans and the obscure caverns of the earth have developed that 3rd eye, that 6th sense. It has been widely proven that ants and other insects can see very well in the light of the infrared rays, but on the contrary, they are in complete obscurity in the light of the violet-colored rays. The outer darkness mentioned by the four Gospels of Christ are indeed black light, another mode of light. Therefore, it is not exaggerated to affirm that the infernal worlds are illuminated by infrared light. It is not necessary to be absolutely perverse in order to enter into the infernal worlds. Those who enter into the underworld are the ones who lived without deserving any type of praise or vituperation from their fellow men. Also, those who were never rebellious or loyal to God, the lukewarm who are as numerous as the sand of the sea, they are the unhappy ones who only live for themselves, those crowds who were never interested in the intimate self-realization of their being. Into the underworld enter the multitudes that walk behind the flag of Esau, the vindictive ones, who changed their birthright for a pottage of lentils, those who say, "First I am going to make money, and then, if I have time, I will dedicate my life to God." Into the infernal worlds enter the lustful ones and those who hate sex, the homosexuals and the ignorant abstinent people who do not reach the second birth. Heaven reproves usury, incontinency, maliciousness, and insane bestiality. Devolution in the infernal worlds is a descent into lower states, passing through animal and pseudo-vegetal states and ending in the mineral kingdom with the fatal epilogue of the second death. Thus, and only thus, can the failed souls become liberated and return into the primeval chaos. Thereafter, they re-enter into a new evolving ascension, passing anew through the mineral, plant, and animal kingdoms towards the human state. Chapter 9. The protoplasmatic bodies. Men of science have proven that metals also are exposed to sickness and death. Certain types of poison can produce sickness and death in metals. In his Rosicrucian novel, Dr. Arnold Krumheller, Huiracocha, Colonel, physician of the Mexican Army and professor of medicine at the University of Berlin, stated that every atom is a trio of matter, energy, and consciousness. We, the Gnostics, know that subatomic particles possess consciousness. We emphatically affirm that the electrical and gravitational characteristics of any given particle represent its mental qualities. The substance of the mind exists in all of the kingdoms of nature, including the mineral, plant, and animal kingdoms. Indeed, the only difference that exists between a beast and an intellectual animal, mistakenly called a human being, lies in the fact that the latter has transformed his mind into intellect. Life and consciousness also exist in certain forms within the elemental particles of nature. These particles receive information beyond time and space. This reminds us of the extrasensorial perceptions of certain very psychic individuals, with whom many experiments have been made in the laboratories of parapsychology. When an electron and a positron, a positive electron, are annihilated in order to liberate energy, two gamma rays, or gamma photons, are produced. These rays are found intimately related amongst themselves. When one of them suffers a transformation, the other inevitably receives its influence. This occurs without having an ordinary physical link between the two. Let the similitude of this phenomenon be observed with those who study parapsychology. The Chinese Li and Yang scientifically demonstrated, by means of experiments with atomic particles, that in our region of the universe, space is not symmetrical and that smaller particles of matter tend to spin themselves towards an advantageous direction. These men of science do not yet know how the former phenomenon can be related with the essential symmetry of living matter. Optic science is now approaching the fourth dimension. Thus, the day in which tetradimensional space will become visible through very powerful lenses is not far away. In his books of medicine, Paracelsus talked about gnomes, undines, nereids, genii, salamanders, sylphs, etc. Naturally, imbecile ignoramuses laugh about all of these things. Within the mineral atoms, we the Gnostics find those gnomes of whom Paracelsus, the medieval physician, talked about. Thus, in the same way that the good Aurelius Paracelsus, in his epoch, utilized the elementals of plants in order to cure the sick, we too know how to do it, even if the ignoramuses of scientism laugh at us. The consciousness of elementals is dressed with supersensible protoplasmic bodies. When universal life concentrates itself within the mineral kingdom, then the protoplasmic bodies or lunar bodies sprout by spontaneous generation. These types of bodies are susceptible to many changes and transformations. When the gnomes from the mineral kingdom enter into the plant kingdom, they suffer transformations within their protoplasmic bodies. When the elementals of plants enter into animal evolution, they suffer new transformations within their protoplasmic bodies. When the evolving wave of life passes from the animal into the human being, that is, when the elementals of animals enter into human wombs for the first time, then new changes and metamorphoses are verified within their protoplasmic bodies. The internal bodies, studied by the pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist schools, are common property for all of the beasts of nature. These are the lunar bodies or protoplasmic bodies. The laws of evolution and devolution are enclosed within the lunar protoplasmic bodies. The protoplasmic bodies evolve until a certain point, perfectly defined by nature. Afterwards, they downwardly precipitate through the way of devolution, reverting their processes until reaching their original point of departure. The evolution of the protoplasmic bodies is performed over the surface of the Earth in this cellular world. The devolution of the protoplasmic bodies is performed within the submerged mineral kingdom. It is not strange that the protoplasmic bodies initiate their devolution in this cellular world. However, their complete devolving processes are processed within the underworld. The protoplasmic bodies can never be destroyed by the death of the physical body. After the physical death, the protoplasmic bodies continue within the molecular world. Spiritualists talk abundantly about the perispirit, which is constituted by the protoplasmic bodies. The ectoplasm, the materialization of the lunar bodies, has been performed successfully in some scientific laboratories. This is how these protoplasmic bodies have been photographed. The embryonic soul, which every human being carries inside, is dressed with these protoplasmic bodies. The intellectual animal, mistakenly called a human being, is a machine that is necessary or the economy of nature. Until the machine can correctly function, the evolution of the protoplasmic bodies is necessary. The human machine automatically receives and transforms certain cosmic rays that later are unconsciously transmitted into the interior layers of the Earth. Every animal and every plant perform, in an unconscious manner, the same function. The intellectual animal cannot be an exception. Each plant, each animal according to its own kind, captures and transforms, for the good of this planetary organism on which we live, a defined type of cosmic rays. Some capture vibrations of the same Earth, terrestrial rays that must be transformed and transmitted into the Earth anew. Other plant and animal families have the mission of receiving and transmitting solar rays that thereafter the Earth avidly receives. Multiple families of plants and animals also exist that receive, transform, and transmit cosmic rays from the great infinite into the interior of our terrestrial organism. The devolving lunar bodies repeat the processes which they had experienced within nature, yet in a reverted way. They retrospectively revive their entire human, animal, plant, and mineral past. When the protoplasmic bodies return to their point of original departure, situated in the mineral kingdom that is the basic point of the scale, then these bodies are reduced to cosmic dust. The destruction of the protoplasmic bodies is indispensable in order to liberate the lost souls. The lost souls return into the original primitive chaos. Here, they have to ascend anew until finally reaching the human state again, that is, after having repeated the very long and millenarian evolving ascension that processes itself through the mineral, plant, animal, and human kingdoms. The destruction of the protoplasmic lunar bodies in the infernal worlds is infinitely painful. Dante marvelously symbolized it in his Divine Comedy. Devolution is a constant downward fall, each time falling towards the past into denser and denser regions, where only weeping and the gnashing of teeth can be heard. The cataclysms that will transform the crust of this earth in a definite way will kill this entire humanity. Thus, this is definitely how this humanity will enter into the infernal worlds. Chapter 10. The Pluralized Eye. The organism of the tricerebrated biped, mistakenly called a human being, is a precious machine with 5 marvelous psychophysiological centers. The order of these centers is as follows: intellectual, emotional, motor, instinctual, and sexual. Each one of these 5 centers penetrates the entire organism. Nonetheless, if one self-observes profoundly, one becomes aware that each one of the centers has a central, basic point situated at a specific area of our organic machine. The center of gravity of the intellect is found in the brain. The center of gravity of emotions is situated in the solar plexus. The center of gravity of movement is situated in the superior part of the dorsal spine. The center of gravity of instinct is found in the inferior part of the dorsal spine. The center of gravity of sex clearly has its roots in the sexual organs. Each one of the centers of the machine has absolutely defined specific functions. An in-depth study of the 5 centers allows us to comprehend that different speeds exist amongst them. This has already been proven. Students of pseudo-occultism and pseudo-esotericism believe that the center of thought is extraordinarily fast. However, they are lamentably mistaken, because the motor and instinctual centers are 30,000 times faster. We have been told that the emotional center is still faster than the motor and instinctual centers. Great sages affirm that the emotional center is indeed 30,000 times faster than the motor and instinctual centers. The specific functions of each center point to certain dualisms in each center, as the dualism of the mind with its incessant battle of antithesis dividing thoughts, the dualism of emotions splitting them into pleasant and unpleasant emotions, the dualism of instinctual sensations splitting them into pleasure and pain, the dualism of sexuality splitting them into attraction and repulsion of sex, etc. Without a doubt, each one of the 5 centers are, at the same time, positive and negative. All of the 5 cylinders of the human machine are fundamental for life, but, without a doubt, the sexual center, the 5th center, is indeed the most important and the fastest of all. The very roots of our existence are found within the latter. The sexual center, because of its fine energy, is extraordinarily subtle and fast. The majority of its manifestations take place on a molecular level, where its impulses are transmitted thousands of times faster than those of the mind. The idea of love at first sight, if indeed it occurs in certain cases, is based on the concrete fact that at a given moment, the sexual function can instantaneously know if a sexual affinity with a certain person of the opposite sex can or cannot exist. Indeed, the search for our sexual complement occurs in each function of our human organism. The sense of attraction, indifference, and repulsion between a man and a woman is the outcome of a highly complicated calculation of the existing factors of reciprocity of each of its functions and of the average or total function of all of those factors together. Fortunately, such a complex and difficult calculation can never be performed by the intellectual center, but only by the sexual center. This center can attain a correct result in a second or even less. Infinite possibilities exist within the sexual center, when it is developed, that can either convert us into angels or devils. The 5th center possesses a certain electronic solar fire that, when wisely awakened, can transform us radically. In ancient times, due to a certain mistake performed by some sacred individuals, humanity developed the negative side of the sexual center, its tenebrous luciferic aspect. When the electronic sexual fire is directed downwards into the atomic infernos of the human being, it becomes the abominable Kundartagwader organ, the tail of Satan. Fortunately, after its development, such luciferic organ vanished from humanity. Nevertheless, its fatal consequences still remain. It is urgent to know that the disastrous consequences of the abominable Kundartagwader organ remain deposited within the 5 cylinders of the human machine. It is indispensable to know that the evil consequences of the abominable Kundartagwader organ constitute the lunar ego, the pluralized I. Lamentably, the 5 psychophysiological centers of the intellectual beast, mistakenly called a human being, are absolutely controlled by that legion of devil eyes that every person carries within. It is painful to know that the soul, the Buddhata, the essence that we carry inside, is bottled up within the lunar ego. The incorrect function of the 5 psychophysiologic centers of the human machine is due to the pernicious activities of the pluralized I, These are the evil consequences of the abominable Kundardaguator organ. It is urgent to dissolve the pluralized I in order to liberate the essence, the Buddhata, the embryo of soul, the psychic material. Those who have never, in any of their lives, preoccupied themselves with the dissolution of their pluralized I, those who have never by any means wanted to terminate the evil consequences of the abominable Kundardaguator organ, will have to enter into the infernal worlds when their cycle of lives concludes at the end of their journey. The entrance of the failures into the submerged mineral kingdom is indispensable for the disintegration of the pluralized I, within which, unfortunately, the essence, the soul, is bottled up. The lunar ego, that conjunction of distinct and diverse entities that travel in an independent way through the supersensible worlds, is hidden within the lunar bodies. The terrible and painful devolution of the pluralized I, with their lunar protoplasmic bodies, in the infernal worlds is a fall, descending backwards, towards the original primitive chaos. The devolution descends from the animal, plant, and mineral steps. On the last rung of the ladder, the fossilized lunar egos are reduced to cosmic dust. This is the second death. The absolute destruction of the pluralized I and its lunar vehicles is indispensable for the liberation of the essence. This lunar race, this perverse Adamic race, is entering into the infernal devolution through successive cataclysms. Wars, hurricanes, sicknesses, fires, inundations, and earthquakes will terminate this lunar race. Chapter 11. The Consciousness. In our former chapter, we talked about the abominable Kundardaguator organ, or tail, or Satan. We clearly stated that it is an electronic sexual luciferic fire that descends from the coccygeal bone, situated at the base of our dorsal spine. This electronic sexual luciferic fire is projected downward into the atomic infernos of the human beings. We stated that due to a lamentable mistake made by certain sacred individuals in times of yore, humanity developed the Kundardaguator organ, which later fortunately vanished from humanity. Now, the electronic sexual fire, which was mistakenly projected towards the atomic infernos, looks like a serpent, which is coiled up 3.5 times within a certain magnetic center, situated in the coccyx. It is clear that in its positive aspect, the electronic solar fire can guide us to final liberation. However, not a single human being is free from the negative flames or from the Kundardaguator fire. Esoteric investigations have demonstrated that this infernal fire exists within the lower atomic depths of the intellectual beast, who is mistakenly called a human being. If those splendid and marvelous worlds that cluster in infinite space are simple granulations of that positive solar fohat, then we can affirm, without fear of being mistaken, that those demonic egos, which we carry within, are just mere crystallizations of that negative and blind fohatic force of the Kundardaguator organ. The consciousness, the essence, the Buddhata. That embryo of soul which every creature carries within is always the innocent victim of all those granulations of the negative sexual fohat. It is lamentable that our consciousness is bottled up within those multiple demonic egos, which in their conjunction constitutes the lunar ego. The myself, the oneself. A true individual does not exist within the wretched intellectual beast. Each idea, each sentiment, each movement, each sensation, each desire, etc., are simply psychological manifestations of the distinct, different egos which are never connected amongst themselves nor coordinated in any way. Any given I will mechanically follow another I, and some of them may even have the luxury of appearing to work together, but not in any systematic order. These satanic egos, horrible crystallizations of the negative sexual fire, are frightfully subconscious and bestial within their depths. Each one of these devil egos has stolen our consciousness, our life, our essence, or psychological material. In any given moment, each one of these satanic egos represent only a meager part of our psychological function. Nonetheless, such an I believes itself to be the Lord, the unique one, the whole. The I that today swears eternal love to a beloved is displaced tomorrow by another I that cares nothing for that oath. Thus, as usual, the individual eventually withdraws and leaves the unhappy beloved one awfully disheartened. The I that today swears fidelity before the Gnostic altar is later displaced by another I that has nothing to do with such an oath. Thus, such an individual withdraws from our Gnostic movement and leaves all of our brethren astonished. The intellectual beast is an unconscious machine without responsibility whatsoever. He does not have true individuality. Within each eye, of the legion of satanic egos, the consciousness sleeps profoundly. The consciousness dreams within each eye. People are hypnotized by that blind fohatic force of the condardaguator organ. There exist 4 states of consciousness: dream, vigil consciousness, self-cognizance, and objective consciousness. Imagine a house with 4 floors. The intellectual beast lives on the 2 inferior floors. By no means is it an exaggeration to affirm that the 2 superior floors in the house of consciousness are absolutely unknown to the wretched intellectual beast. The first state of consciousness is the normal, ordinary sleep. The pluralized I, enveloped by its lunar protoplasmic bodies, abandons the physical body and ambulates within the molecular world. The second state, mistakenly classified as a state of vigil consciousness, is in its depth a simple continuation of our dreams. Indeed, this state is much more dangerous than the first state. People of this present humanity are dreamers 100%, as someone once unmistakably said. Life is but a dream. The intellectual beast labors and drives cars while in a state of slumber. He is born in a dream state and dies while in a dream state. Chapter 8. The Submerged Mineral Kingdom. The 4 Gospels of Jesus Christ insist upon the necessity of awakening. However, the intellectual beast believes that he is awakened. When someone accepts that he is asleep, it is an unmistakable sign that he wants to awaken. The world has 7 dimensions. However, the intellectual animal only perceives 3 because his consciousness is asleep. The intellectual animal has a frightful tridimensional psychological idiosyncrasy. This is why his deficient spatial sense only perceives length, width, and height. The development of spatial sense is only possible once the consciousness is awakened. The clear perception of the superior dimensions of space is only possible with the awakening of the consciousness. A line is the print that a dot leaves while moving through space. A plane is the print that a line leaves while moving through space. A solid is the print that a plane leaves while moving through space. A hypersolid is the print that a solid leaves while moving through space. It is the 4th dimension of any given body. Hypersolids, hypervolume, and hyperspace are only perceptible with the awakening of the consciousness. We have been told that the 4th dimension is time, in its exclusively temporal aspect. We have been informed that the 5th dimension is eternity. Without a doubt, the 6th dimension is beyond time and eternity. The absolute 0 exists in dimensional subject matters. The 0 dimension is pure spirit. This is a 7th dimension. The intellectual beast is bottled up in Euclidean geometry because he has never awakened his consciousness. The consciousness that slumbers is content with Euclid's tridimensional geometry. One-dimensional creatures only possess sensations of pleasure and pain, likes and dislikes, for example, the snail. Bidimensional creatures such as dogs, cats, and horses, etc., possess sensations and representations. The tridimensional biped, mistakenly called a human being, possesses sensations, representations, and concepts. The spatial sense can never be developed without the awakening of the consciousness. The spatial sense includes, in an absolute manner, the 5 senses and many other senses that physiologists absolutely ignore. This present humanity has their consciousness asleep, and they are entering into the underworld in this state, yet they are totally convinced that they are doing very well. Chapter 12. Reincarnation, Return. Distinct degrees of splendor and hierarchy exist among the angels of death. However, all of them rely upon the supreme commands of the 3rd aspect of property, Mother Space, the Blessed Goddess Mother Death, Hecate, Proserpine, Kotlikue, Kali, etc. Despite their spectral, skeletal figure, with a scythe held in the right hand and dressed in funeral attire, these ministers of death have a terribly divine appearance indeed. According to the law of destiny, the angels of death cut the thread of life on a precise day and hour. Within the sepulchral tomb, the physical body and the personality come to an end. However, the personality slowly disintegrates and does not always remain within the tomb, since it usually wanders around the cemetery or pantheon. Pseudo-occultist literature has abundantly spoken about the vital body or lingam sarira, which is the foundation of organic life. The existence of the physical body would be impossible without the vital body. However, the vital body is not the personality. At the rate at which the cadaver disintegrates, so too does the vital body. Yet, the personality ambulates within the pantheon and its disintegration is slower than that of the vital body. Those who affirm that the personality reincarnates are unfortunately lying, because the personality is a child of its own time. The personality is born in its own time and dies in its own time. There is no tomorrow for the personality of the dead. That which continues beyond death is the ego, dressed with lunar bodies. That which never dies is the essence, the buddhata, the soul that unfortunately is bottled up within the ego. The retrospective vision of the life that has just ended is made with the sole purpose of taking an inventory of that existence. This way, we know what we have and what we lack. After the inventory is taken of the existence that has just ended, the judgment before the tribunals of karma is precise. In ancient times, almost all of the souls were temporarily released from within their ego. In this way, they were able to experience a so-called vacation within the molecular and electronic worlds. Nevertheless, after such a vacation they reincorporated themselves within this valley of tears, much like a genie who re-enters the same bottle. In this day and age of anguish and perversity, souls hardly have such vacations within the superior worlds. Now the disincarnated enter into the infernal worlds or return immediately to this valley of tears in order to finish, as quickly as possible, their cycle of successive lives. The pseudo-occultist literature mistakenly affirms that millions of lives are designated to every human soul until it achieves perfection. However, this concept is false. According to the law of number, measurement, and weight, only a certain number of existences are assigned to every human soul. Indeed, only 108 lives are assigned to every human soul. These are the 108 beads of the Buddha's necklace. Brahmins symbolize the cycle of successive lives with the ritual of the sacred cow. They perform 108 liturgical rounds around the cow, while holding a collar of 108 beads and chant the magical mantra Om Mani Padme Hum. The souls who conclude their cycle of existences, without having reached the angelic state, enter into the infernal worlds. In these times, after the final judgment of 1950, almost all of the souls have completed their cycle of existences or are very near to completion. Disincarnated souls are now entering into the infernal worlds in surges because times have come to an end for this Aryan root race. Pseudo-occultist literature has abundantly written about the law of reincarnation. However, this law is only for sacred individuals. Reincarnation implies a reincarnating individuality, and if individuality does not exist, then reincarnation is not applied. Pseudo-occultist literature asserts the concept that the intellectual animal has already achieved individuality. However, this concept is as false as the one that affirms that humans, from this present humanity, already have authentic astral, mental, and causal solar vehicles within their possession. The ego is a conjunction of different and diverse entities unknown to one another. That is not individuality, therefore, it is an absurdity to affirm that those entities reincarnate. It is better to affirm that the pluralized I regresses, reincorporates, or returns to this valley of tears. The ego continues through our descendants. The agony of a man is identical to the ecstasy of his conception. Death and conception are found intimately joined. They form a unique whole. The path of life is made by the hoof prints of the horse of death. Death and conception are one. Death and judgment are one. Judgment and conception are one. Death, judgment, and conception are one. At the moment of conception, the psychological design of the one who agonizes while dying enters along with the zoosperm into the egg. Just as a wave transmitted by a television station carries an invisible image of an actor who acts, likewise, the disintegration of the elements, from the old body, originates a vibration that invisibly passes through time and space. Such a vibration carries the design of the man who agonizes while dying. Thus, just as the broadcasted image is recaptured by an appropriate device and becomes visible, many hundreds and thousands of kilometers away from the place where it was actually emitted, likewise, the fecundated egg is the receptive organ for the psychological design of the agonizing man. After death, the different entities which constitute the ego come and go through the molecular region. However, not all of these entities return into a new human womb. Some of these entities enter into the underworld. Others enter into inferior wombs of the irrational animal kingdom. Others enter into the plant kingdom, and some, finally dressed with their lunar bodies, continue on through their descendants. On a certain occasion, Pythagoras scolded a disciple who wanted to kick a howling dog. He said, "Do not hurt that dog, because in his painful howling I have recognized a friend of mine who died some time ago." This is the wise law of metempsychosis, which is so detested by the fanatics of the dogma of evolution. Souls also enter into the infernal worlds in fractions. Thus, many people who presently live within the physical world already have parts of themselves within the infernal worlds. Thus, in the abyss Dante found fractions of souls who were condemned to the second death inside sepulchres. The sepulchre is the symbol that corresponds to these souls. Dante asked his master, "May those who lie within these sepulchres be seen?" Already all the lids are raised, and none over them keeps watch. Virgil the poet from Mantua answered, "They shall be closed all, when they hear from Josaphat returned shall come, and bring their bodies, which above they now have left." Saint Josaphat is the Buddha, and the valley of Josaphat is this world of samsara. The final judgment has already taken place. The egos in their totality are entering into the infernal worlds. Thus, this is how the symbolic sepulchres of Dante are closed. The final objective of the infernal worlds is to destroy the ego and the lunar bodies in order for the soul to become liberated through the door of the second death. The suffering of the failed souls in the infernal worlds is symbolically written by Dante in his Divine Comedy. The most perverse black magicians live within the infernal worlds. It will take trillions of years before they can reach the second death. Ordinary people can reach the second death in 800 to 1,000 years more or less. The souls pay a karmic invoice within the infernal worlds every 100 years. In the infernal worlds, time is extremely long and terribly boring. It is time of millenarian rocks. The second death is necessary so that the failed souls can return into the primeval original chaos. Here, they have to reinitiate their journey, passing through mineral, plant, and animal evolutions until finally reaching the human state anew. Chapter 13. The Law of Recurrence. By judiciously analyzing the theory of reincarnation that has been stated by many different pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist thinkers of this day and age, we have arrived at the conclusion that all of these authors are totally confused. The doctrine of reincarnation comes from the cult of Krishna, which is an ancient Vedic religion. Unfortunately, this sublime doctrine was extremely adulterated by many reformers. In the cult of Krishna, it has been wisely stated that only the gods, demigods, heroes, titans, divine kings, masters, and guides of humanity reincarnate. Nevertheless, the diverse pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist schools have propagated this concept in a very mistaken way. These schools mistakenly preach onto the multitudes that every human being reincarnates. Alongside the doctrine of reincarnation, there also exists the idea of the transmigration of souls, which includes the reincorporation of human souls into animal creatures. Obviously, the terrible human pride considered the reincorporation of human souls into animal creatures as an alteration or distortion of the wise doctrine of reincarnation. Thus, inevitably, by dint of pride, the theory of the transmigration of souls was rejected. In the four Gospels, Jesus Christ emphasizes the difficulty that exists in order to enter into the kingdom. The great master never said that all human beings would enter into the kingdom. Here enters the law of natural selection. Many are called, and few are chosen. The entire human species, with the exception of a few, enter into the infernal worlds, where they are terminated through the second death. This event is always repeated in all of the planets of infinite space. We have already stated that only with the second death can the lost souls be liberated from the infernal worlds. The law of eternal return always brings the failed souls, who lived within the underworld and who passed through the second death, to a new cosmic manifestation. The law of eternal return provides the foundation for the doctrine of the transmigration of souls. Millions of failed souls, from past cycles of manifestation, are now elementals from the mineral or plant kingdoms and also animal creatures who long to reconquer the human state which they had lost in times of yore. The wise idea of the eternal return of all things is invariably united to Pythagorean wisdom and to the sacred Hindustani cosmogony. The entire doctrine about the life of Brahma, Mahamanvantaras and Pralayas, Kalpas, the breath of Brahma, etc., are intimately related to the doctrine of Pythagoras and to the law of reoccurrence or eternal return. An in-depth analysis of Buddhism takes us to the conclusion that Buddha taught the law of eternal return or reoccurrence in his doctrine of successive lives. Simplicius, cited by Ouspensky, wrote, Pythagoreans stated that the same things are repeated over and over again. In connection with this theory, it is interesting to observe the words of Eudemus, disciple of Aristotle. In the third book of Physics, he stated, "Some people accept, and others reject that time is repeated. Repetition is understood in diverse ways. One type of repetition can occur in the natural order of things, for instance the repetition of summers, winters, and other seasons, in the way that a new season comes after the disappearance of the other. The movement of heavenly bodies and the phenomena produced by them belong to this order of things, such as the solstices and equinoxes that are produced by the movement of the sun. Yet, if we are to believe the Pythagoreans, another type of repetition exists. This means that I will talk to you and sit exactly like this while holding in my hand the same stick, and everything will be the same as now, and time, as you might expect, will be the same. Because, if the movements of the heavenly bodies and many other things are the same, then, what has already occurred in the past and what will occur afterwards are also the same. This also is applied to repetition, which is always the same. Everything is the same. To the law of reoccurrence, magnificently exposed by Eudemus in the former paragraphs, the only thing we have to add is the spiral that according to Pythagoras is the curve of life. Time is round and everything is repeated, at times in higher spirals, at times in lower spirals. The incessant repetition of the same dramas, the same scenes, the same events in each one of the 108 lives, that the cosmic law always assigns to every human soul, is interesting and yet simultaneously painful. Each life is a repetition of the previous life plus its good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant karmic consequences. When a man dies, the anguishing moments of his agonizing death, his last moments and realizations, his last sensations and his last fears are all found intimately related with the enjoyments of love which originate his new birth. A new life starts exactly under the same conditions as that of the previous one. Clearly it cannot start in any other way. According with the law of recurrence, when we are reborn again within this valley of tears, the past is converted into the future. The intellectual animal, mistakenly called a human being, cannot change his circumstances. He is a victim of circumstance. Everything that happens to him is as mechanical as one season flowing into another. However, he has the illusion of doing things, yet, in reality he does not have the power to do anything. Through him, all things happen. Only the being is capable of doing. Only the being can originate new circumstances. Only the being can change the order of things. But alas, the intellectual animal has not incarnated the being. Within this valley of bitterness there exist human machines with absolute repetition. They are 100% mechanical. These are people who repeat even the most insignificant details from their previous lives, constantly reincorporating themselves. Within this valley of St. Josaphat there are certain people whose repetition varies. At times, they revive their previous lives in higher spirals and at times in lower spirals. On our very intriguing planet there also exist certain types of people who have an increasing tendency towards degeneration. They resolutely march upon the descending spiral path. These are the drunkards, suicides, homosexuals, prostitutes, drug addicts, thieves, assassins, etc. In each life, these types of people repeat, over and over again, in a descending manner, the same crimes. Thus, finally, they enter into the infernal worlds. On the other hand, in an apparently brilliant contrast to the previously mentioned descending life, yet, in a position equally abominable, we find upper-class people, such as the great celebrities who worship the great harlot, millionaires, the multimillionaires, and the perverse scientists who invent destructive weapons. Likewise, we find the tenebrous henchmen of the dialectic materialism who take from humanity their eternal values. Sports fanatics and the great boxing contenders are there as well. Vain record breakers and comedians, who love to play with their monster of 1,000 faces, exist there too. Famous movie stars who justify all of their adulteries with innumerable matrimonies and divorces also abide there. Here too can we find the degenerated artists of this new age, painters, rock and roll bands, dancers and singers, of rap, pop, Latin, etc. Likewise we find the founders of harmful sects, the writers of pornographic literature, etc. All types of skeptical people are found here as well, etc. All types of celebrities are hypnotized by triumph. This is precisely their great danger. They ignore that they are going down on a descending spiral. Thus, they enter into the infernal worlds inebriated by triumph. Triumphant types of people know exactly what they have to do each time they return to this worldly scenario. Thus, this is how they repeat their same adventures. So, the law of recurrence is the cause for the devolution of all of these types of people in the infernal worlds. Within the abyss they have to repeat, in a devolving manner, all of the animal, plant, and mineral processes, which, in times of yore, they had already passed through yet in an evolving manner. The final disintegration in the underworld is necessary and indispensable in order to liberate the lost souls. After having passed through their frightful millenarian journey within the underworld, these souls return to a new manifestation that has to begin on the lowest level, which is the mineral kingdom. Chapter 14. The Human Machine. If we vivaciously imagine, in a clear and precise manner, the resplendent and elongated body of the solar system, we will see all of its beautiful coverings and intertwined threads which were formed by the marvelous traces of the planets. Then, from such a receptive state, the living image of the human organism, with its skeletal, lymphatic, arterial, nervous, etc. systems, will come into our minds. Without a doubt, the constitution of the human organism is also constituted and reunited in a similar manner. In space, when looking upon the solar system of Ors from afar, which is the solar system in which we live, move and have our existence, it looks like a human being who walks throughout the unalterable infinite. The microcosmic human being is, in his turn, a solar system in miniature. A marvelous machine with various distributed nets of energy which are in distinct degrees of tension. The structure of the human organism is constituted by 7 or 8 systems which are held together by a formidable skeletal assemblage that, thanks to its connected tissue, is reunited into a solid whole. Medical science has verified that all of these systems, from the human organism, are properly united and harmonized by the heart, which is the sun of this physical organism. The existence of the microcosmic human being depends upon its vivifies heart. Each organic system embraces the entire human body. Through its internal secretion, one endocrine gland reigns with sovereignty over each system. Indeed, these marvelous glands are living micro-laboratories which are situated on specific places, such as regulators and transformers. In summary, we can emphatically affirm that the highest mission of these glandular microlaboratories are to transform the vital energies produced by the human machine. It has been stated that the human organism obtains its nourishment from the air which we breathe, from the food that we eat, and from the solar light. These glandular microlaboratories have to transform the vital energies from the above-mentioned nourishments. Indeed, this is an amazing and marvelous labor. Each endocrine gland has to transform the vital energy acquired through these 3 types of nourishments into the degree of tension required by its own system and function. The human organism possesses 7 superior glands and 3 nervous systems. The law of 7 and the law of 3 intensely work within the human machine. The cerebrum spinal nervous system produces those very seldom conscious functions that occasionally manifest themselves through the intellectual animal. The sympathetic nervous system marvelously stimulates the unconscious and instinctual functions. The parasympathetic or vagus restrains the instinctual functions and acts as a complement of the latter. Thus, we are totally accurate when affirming, without fear of being mistaken, that these 3 nervous systems represent the law of 3, the 3 primary forces within the human machine. Likewise, the 7 endocrine glands and their secretions represent the law of 7 with all of their musical scales. Indeed, a system that controls the release of active nervous impulses exists. So, does another that controls the release of passive nervous impulses, and also a third that controls the release of the mediator nervous impulses emanating from our thoughts, our reasoning, and our consciousness. The nerves as agents of the law of 3 control the endocrine glands that, as we have already stated, represent the law of 7. The glands are controlled by the nerves, but in turn, these are also controlled. This is similar to the specific functions of the planets that move around the sun. The planets control and yet are controlled. We mentioned and we repeat again that the human machine has 5 centers. First, the intellectual center. Second, the emotional center. Third, the motor center. Fourth, the instinctual center. And fifth, the sexual center. We have explained many times that the 5 cylinders of the human machine are unfortunately controlled by the pluralized I, by that legion of I which live within these psychological centers. The human machine, as any other machine, moves under the impulses of the subtle forces of nature. The secret agents that move the human machines are first the cosmic radiations and second the pluralized I. The cosmic radiation is formed by 2 great component groups that work within the great laboratory of nature in the same way that they do within the human machine. The first group is formed by rays of great hardness and elevated penetration. These rays come from sidereal space. They have energies which oscillate at about 5 billion electrovolts. When penetrating our planet, these rays collide with the particles of high atmosphere, thus originating impacts that segregate into nourished beams of light and starry rays. The hardness of this cosmic radiation is formed by protons, neutrons, and mesons. The latter are already classified as positive, negative, and neutral according to the law of 3. The second group, or bland radiation, is formed by secondary rays, which are produced within the terrestrial atmosphere. According to investigations performed by scientists, these types of rays are impacts that are the outcome of the hard radiation that has collided against the atoms in the air, which also originate beams of light and starry rays. Some of these are formed by 500,000 particles, which within their development tend to extend through very broad areas. It is stated that the energy of the component corpuscles of bland radiation oscillate between 1 million and 100 million electrovolts. The influence of any given adverse planetary conjunction, any ominous quadrature of planets, or any given tension produced by the exaggerated approach of 2 planets, is enough in order for millions of human machines to toss themselves into war. Obviously, such a war would be justified by many reasons, mottos, flags that must be defended, motives for which it would be imperative to fight, etc. Thus, the gravest foolishness of the intellectual animals is to believe that they are doing things, when indeed they cannot do anything. They are simple human marionettes moved by unknown forces. Cosmic radiation originates infinite changes within the subjective psyche of the intellectual animal, within his psychological idiosyncrasy. This is how certain egos emerge and others immerse. This is how some diabolic egos emerge to the surface while others get lost within the 40-9 regions of the subconsciousness. This is how bewilderment and surprise take place. The one who swore eternal love unexpectedly walks away. The one who swore fidelity to Gnosis soon betrays it. The one who never drank alcohol is now drinking it. The one who wanted to perform certain business suddenly loses all interest, etc. Human machines have no sense of moral responsibility whatsoever. They are simple marionettes who think, feel, and act in accordance to the type of eye that controls the capital centers of the human machine in a given moment. In fact, if one type of eye is displaced, then the human marionette modifies his mental and sentimental processes. Thus, the outcome is different and may even be in the form of completely opposite actions. Sometimes certain diabolic egos, which do not belong to a certain person but which belong to other people's psyche, come and accommodate themselves within any of the 5 cylinders of the human machine. This is how the honest citizen becomes a thief, and the one who never dared to kill, not even a little bird, suddenly is converted into a cruel assassin, etc. The I, which all human beings carry within themselves, is a plurality, and its true name is Legion. The sequence of these diabolic egos, their continuance in terrible struggle for supremacy, depends upon many external and internal influences and finally, upon cosmic radiations. The heat of the sun and the good or bad weather immediately gives way to the emergence of certain egos which take over the human machine. Some of these egos can be stronger than others. Rains, contrarieties, vain swift happiness, originate new and annoying egos. Nevertheless, the wretched human marionette does not have even the smallest notion of these changes, because his consciousness is asleep. His sense of being is always within the last manifested I among themselves. Certain stronger egos dominate other weak egos, however. Their strength comes from the energy of the cylinders of the human machine. All of the egos are the outcome of the external and internal influences. True individuality does not exist within the intellectual animal. Present humans are merely machines. Chapter 15. Evolution and Devolution. According to the dictionary, the ordinary definition of the word evolution is a process of progressive development that is governed by certain precise, yet unknown laws. For the Epicurean swine or henchman of materialistic dialectics, the concept of evolution, first of all, rejects the idea of an intelligent plan and a creator logos. The foolish fanatics of that farce written by Karl Marx, which is called materialistic dialectics, stupidly believe that evolution is an independent and mechanical process without God or law. For the students of the different pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist schools, the concept of evolution, first of all, includes the idea of an intelligent plan and a creator logos. Thus, the word evolution contains in itself a dogmatic significance. Precisely, this is its characteristic feature. The present materialistic scientific bases of evolution are, first, the nebular theories related with the origin of the universe, with all their innumerable alterations, modifications, additions, restrictions, and so on. Indeed, all of these do not even minutely alter this original mistaken conception theory related with the mechanical constructive processes in second. The capricious theory of Darwin related to the origin of the species with all its corrections and subsequent changes. There is a lot to comment about in regard to nebular conceptions. In this day and age, very ingenious theories about the origin of the universe have been invented. Nevertheless, all of them are just pure fantastic speculations without any corroboration. These are mere games of the mind, foolishness. The evolution and transformation of the species, in strictly Darwinist sense, is based upon facts artificially selected. In order to prove such a theory, they rely on comparative anatomy, on morphology, on embryology, on paleontology, etc. However, in each decade they deny the facts from the previous decade and substitute old facts for new facts. Nevertheless, such a theory remains untouchable. Indeed, the appearance of new species, as a result of the law of evolution, is no more than a simple hypothesis since it has never been verified. Nobody has ever witnessed the appearance of a new species. When creating the theory of evolution, modern thought forgot about the destructive devolving processes of nature. The reason lies in the much too limited field of intellectual vision of these times. Due to this, pompous theories are elaborated upon. All of them are very beautiful, but all have an insufficient number of facts. Within these theories, none of the processes are certainly and entirely known. These theories only observe part of the process of evolution. Erudites state that this process consists as a type of evolving change. In this day and age, the human mind is already so degenerated that it has become incapable of even comprehending the inverse degenerative process on a greater scale. Present erudites' minds are so trapped, bottled up within the dogma of evolution, that their minds only know how to think or function according to their own bottled-up condition. This is why they attribute unto the other phenomena, that is, devolution, destruction, decadence and degeneration, the qualification of evolution, development and progress. Stone Age people and cultures are neither from the beginning nor from the end of the world. These Stone Age people are only the declination and degeneration of very wealthy ancient civilizations. This is demonstrated by the remains of prehistoric cultures, also by the data of comparative philology, which shows the astonishing psychological wealth of archaic languages and the irrefutable ancient documents of art and literature. Not all of the isolated villages of this so boasted about modern civilization are savages. To reject this present civilized barbarism is not a sign of savagery. However, this does not mean that isolated villages in a state of complete savagery do not exist. The truly savage or semi-savage villages found by modern explorers are without a doubt degenerated descendants of extraordinarily cultured people who existed before the Stone Age. None of the truly primitive villages found by explorers have shown any sign of evolution. On the contrary, in all of the cases without exception, the unmistakable signs of degeneration and devolution have been observed. All of the savage or semi-savage villages have or preserve legends and traditions from a golden age or from a heroic epoch. Indeed, these legends and traditions talk about their own past or their own ancient civilizations. This very fact demonstrates, with meridian clarity, the indisputable superiority of their Paleolithic drawings, in other words, the most ancient drawings found within the profound caves of the earth. These are related to the Neolithic drawings, meaning the most recent ones. The Gnostic brother C. Iturralde V. sent us an interesting letter from his country Bolivia, he said. Here there exists something very intriguing and peculiar in relation to a certain legend. This legend is not just a fantastic tale made up by some minds, instead, it is something that has an objective reality. In this village there existed a certain Lilliputian tribe with human bodies that scarcely reached some 15 centimeters and others that were 25 centimeters in stature. They lived in a kind of village or community which had houses along with utensils, pots, etc., and they were built by them. When I was a child, I heard about such beings existing near to the city where I lived, in Lopez exactly, which is a plateau surrounded by mountains, Los Andes, and enormous surface facing the east. Now, I know that close to Potosi, about some 120 kilometers away, there exists a village whose buildings are about 30 centimeters in height. Within the home's utensils can be found which correspond to extremely small people. People say that this village is surrounded by very odd, pointed hills which extend 2 to 3 meters in height, yet for this village those hills appear to be mountains. The most elevated mountains, measuring many hundreds of meters in height, rise above it. It has been said that the indigenous of that area do not allow anybody to approach this oddity. This is a very devolving Lemurian race. This is a Lilliputian and Jinn race of Sumerian myths, authentic Nibelungs. Scientists of today are beginning to study indelible prints of these human ants that came from there, the Lilliputian, galleries and that have even been found on Rupestrian paintings. The so-called European primitive races of the Stone Age, such as the Cro-Magnon that lived in the caverns of the earth, were formerly very beautiful, but the degenerative descending cyclical impulse acted terribly on those races of Atlantean origin. Finally, the Paleolithic man left his position to his successor, disappearing almost completely from the scene. Inside any evolving process there exists a degenerative, devolving process. The law of evolution and its twin sister the law of devolution work in a synchronized and harmonious way within all of creation. The laws of evolution and devolution constitute the mechanical axle of nature. We, the Gnostics, do not deny the law of evolution. This law exists. However, to assign mistaken and false factors and principles onto this law is wrong. The intimate self-realization of the human being is not the outcome of any mechanization. The law of evolution and the law of devolution are mechanical laws. The intimate self-realization of the human being is the outcome of tremendous self-cognitive super-efforts made by oneself and within oneself, here and now. To deny the law of evolution would be an absurdity. Nonetheless, to attribute to this law factors that it does not have is stupidity. Evolution exists in any creative process, for instance, in the seed that dies so that the stalk must sprout, in the creature that is gestated within the maternal womb and is born. Evolution exists within the plants that bloom. Yet, devolution exists in any destructive process, for example, the tree that withers and which eventually becomes a pile of wood, the plant that grows old and dies. Devolution exists in the elder who agonizes and finally inhales his last breath. Everything that exists in creation evolves until a certain point perfectly defined by nature. Thereafter, it devolves until returning to the point of original departure. Therefore, no single living being can self-realize or attain liberation through the mechanical law of evolution. Chapter 16. The Revolution of the Consciousness. The Bhagavad Gita, the sacred book of Lord Krishna, literally states the following: of many thousand mortals, one, perchance, strive for perfection, and of those few that strive, and rise high to perfection, one only here and there knoweth me perfectly, as I am, the very rightness. Jesus the great Kabir said, strive to enter in at the strait gate, for many, I say unto you, will seek to enter in and shall not be able. When once the master of the house is risen up, and hath shut to the door, and ye begin to stand without, and to knock at the door, saying, Lord, Lord, open unto us, and he shall answer and say unto you, I know you not whence ye are. Then shall ye begin to say, we have eaten and drunk in thy presence, and thou hast taught in our streets. But he shall say, I tell you, I know you not whence ye are. Depart from me, all ye workers of iniquity. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth, when ye shall see Abraham, and Isaac, and Jacob, and all the prophets, in the kingdom of God, and you, yourselves, thrust out. Luke 13 verses 24-28. Within the four Gospels, which are indeed four texts written in alchemical and Kabbalistic codes, Jesus the great Kabir emphasizes the tremendous difficulty that exists in order to enter into the kingdom. The Dhammapada, the sacred book of Buddhism, states, few among men are they who cross to the further shore. The other folk only run up and down the bank on this side. Any scholar of science can verify by themselves the scientific process of natural selection. Because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way, which leadeth unto light, and few there be that find it. Matthew 7 verse 14. The Florentine Dante, disciple of Virgil, the poet of Mantua, starts the reciting of his Divine Comedy in the following way. In the midway of this our mortal life I found me in a gloomy wood, astray, gone from the path direct. And even to tell it were no easy task, how savage wild that forest, how robust and rough its growth, which to remember only, my dismay renews, in bitterness not far from death. Yet, to discourse of what there good befell, all else will I relate discovered there. How first I entered it I scarce can say, such sleepy dullness in that instant weighed my senses down, when the true path I left. Dante Alighieri, that powerfully illuminated one who wrote the Divine Comedy, also committed the mistake of having gone astray from the upright path. Thus, he fell into the gloomy forest of mundaneness. It is very difficult to find the path, yet, what is even more difficult is to stay firmly on the path and never abandon it. Whosoever wants to ascend must first of all descend, this is the law. Initiation is death and birth at the same time. When Dante wanted to ascend to the summit of the august mountain of initiation, his guru made him descend into the infernal worlds. This is the law. Within the underworld, the Florentine poet saw and heard the suffering souls of the ancient, condemned ones. There he also found the sincere, but mistaken ones who within the Luciferian flames of their own passions are naively awaiting the day and hour in order to occupy their place among the blessed ones. Dante would not have found the terrible mysteries of the abyss without those symbolic women named Lucia, Divine Grace, Beatrice, Spiritual Soul, and Rachel, Mercy. Within the underworld Dante found many sages and many men full of prestige and knowledge. He also found many centaurs, half human, half beast. Within the underworld live very famous centaurs, such as the great Chiron who Achilles nursed. Pholus prone to wrath is found there too, and the cruel Attila, who was the scourge of God on earth, and many others who in this day and age in certain countries are venerated as national heroes. The path that leads to the intimate self-realization of the being begins within the very atomic infernos of the wretched intellectual animal, mistakenly called a human being. Thereafter, it continues in the molecular purgatory of the initiate and concludes in the electronic regions of the empyrean. Every neophyte must learn how to distinguish between a downfall and a descent. The conscious descent of Dante into the infernal worlds is not a downfall. Only on the path, based on the tremendous intimate super efforts in ourselves and within ourselves, is the development of all marvelous occult possibilities of the human being possible. The development of these possibilities has never been a law. Undoubtedly, we can and must emphatically affirm that the law for the unhappy intellectual beast, before being swallowed up by the mineral kingdom, is that he has to miserably exist within the vicious circle of the mechanical laws of nature. Thus, even if the weak and the cowards become frightened, it is urgent to state that the path which guides the brave to the intimate self-realization is frightfully revolutionary and terribly dangerous. We need to rise up on arms against nature, against the cosmos, against mundaneness, against ourselves, against everything, against everybody. It does not matter what the cost might be. This is the path of the revolution of the consciousness. This is the difficult path. This is the path greatly detested by the perverse of this lunar race. This path is the opposite of ordinary daily life. It is based on other principles, and it is submitted to other laws. Precisely on this its power and significance lay. Ordinary daily life, the routines of daily life, even in their most amiable and delectable aspects, lead human beings towards the infernal worlds and the second death. It cannot lead them to any other place. What is normal and natural is that this race of Adam will serve as nourishment for the entrails of this planetary organism in which we live. It would be odd, strange, and difficult for someone to be saved and enter into the kingdom. Now, beloved reader, you will comprehend the frightening tragedy in which we live. Fortunately, this is why the omnimerciful, the infinitude that sustains all, the very, very sacred absolute Son, periodically send avatars, saviors to this valley of tears. These sacred individuals, these messengers, these saviors are living incarnations of the omnimerciful. Nevertheless, this lunar race, this perverse race of Adam mortally hates such helpers. In the Bhagavad Gita the blessed Lord said, "Albeit I am unborn, undying, indestructible, and the Lord of all living creatures. Nonetheless, by dominating my property, I incarnate on floating nature forms through my own Maya. When righteousness declines, O Bharata. When wickedness is strong, I incarnate, from age to age, and incarnate in a visible shape, and move a man with men, succoring the good, thrusting the evil back, and setting religion on her seat again. Who knows the truth touching my reincarnation on earth and my divine work? When he quits, the flesh puts on its load no more, falls no more down to earthly birth. To me he comes, O Arjuna. The blessed Krishna, the blessed Buddha, the blessed Lama, the blessed Muhammad, the essential lover Ashiata Shimash, Moses, Quetzalcoatl, and many others, were all avatars. The doctrine of all avatars has its roots in the three basic factors of the revolution of the consciousness: to be born, to die, and to sacrifice the self for humanity. Jesus the Great Kabir magisterially synthesized the doctrine of the revolution of the consciousness when saying, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be slain, and be raised the third day." Luke 9 verse 22. But he also added, "Verily I say unto you, there be some standing here, which shall not taste of death, till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Matthew 16 verse 28. Chapter 17. The Moon. It is absolutely false to state that the moon is the offspring of the earth. The Greek legend of Selene, the moon, is very suggestive and goes beyond purely geological explanations. Selene is the lunar race, this perverse race of Adam. It was born of Thea, the earth, and of Hyperion, the sun, as a giver of life, who was loved by Pan, the world of nature. The Greek legend states that the beautiful and enchanted Selene was enamored with Endymion, this lunar race which was put to sleep by Zeus in an unfinished dream. The Greek legend of Selene refers to the lunar race and has no relation to that capricious theory from the 19th century that affirms that the moon is, during a cosmic cataclysm, a detached fragment from the still unformed Earth. The great martyr from the 19th century H.P. Blavatsky affirms, based on very ancient archaic documents and on esoteric investigations performed within the Akashic records of nature, that the moon is anterior to Earth. It is the mother of the Earth. The moon is a dead world. The moon, during the past Mahamanvantara, was a densely populated world, filled with sun, life, yet now, it is a cadaver. The lunar anima mundi was absorbed within the abstract absolute space during the Great Pralaya, cosmic night. When the dawn of the new Mahamanvantara, cosmic day was initiated, the lunar anima mundi took on a new form again on the planet Earth. When this subject matter related with lunar and terrestrial events is seen from our cosmic angle, then, we can affirm that HPB was not mistaken when she stated that the moon is the mother of the Earth, the antecessor of our globe. The moon is where our parents or pitris came from. Now, in relation to our satellite, the Earth has a responsibility that appears to be unique within the solar system. Our afflicted planet seems to hold 10 times more weight than the Sun. The total mass formed by all of the planets of our solar system is just the 800th part of the mass of the Sun. However, the lunar mass is nothing more than the 80th part of the Earth. Nonetheless, the lunar mass in itself is not the only thing that afflicts our planet. The space distance, from the Earth to the moon, that the Earth utilizes in order to hold its moon also afflicts our planet. Only the Ancient of Days, the old Saturn with its resplendent rings, holds a big moon at such a distance, and that moon is comparative to a feather. If we compare the Earth with a clock, then we would say that the moon is its pendulum, and if we compare it with a ship, then we would say that the moon is its ballast. Wherever the motive power energy is applied to any given mechanism, any type of weight is indispensable in order to soften and accentuate its animating force and to also impede its whole to be precipitated into space. Medics know very well that the organism of this wretched intellectual animal is constituted by a defined number of elements. Thus, they know that the dense weight of iodine needs to be below in order to balance the active principle of hydrogen which is located above. Since the moon regulates and administers solar energy, it acts as a mechanical commander for the Earth. Without the moon as a powerful equilibrator of weights, the rotation of the Earth and the magnetic solar attraction would cause all the liquids from the terrestrial surface of the Earth to inevitably be tossed away into outer space. The effect of the moon on the tides is something that nobody can deny. Facts are facts, and by facing the facts we surrender to them. The moon controls the whole mechanism of nature. The moon acts upon the incorporeal and inorganic liquids and also upon the liquids which are incorporated into organic matter. The moon controls the growth of plants. It exercises influence upon the sexual fluids. The moon regulates the menstrual flux of women. The moon governs the conception of all creatures, etc. Indeed, the moon is like the weight of the pendulum of a clock. The mechanism of the clock is the organic life on planet Earth. The whole mechanism enters into movement thanks to the oscillation of the weight, the moon. Everything that happens in this valley of tears is due to the lunar influence. All of the multiple processes of organic life are lunar. All of the processes of thinking, feeling and acting of people are lunar. All vices and evilness of crowds are lunar. Wars, hatred, adulteries, fornications, envy, ambition, avarice, all degenerations and abominations of this great harlot, humanity, whose number is 666, are lunar. The moon, as a tenebrous vampire, sucks the sensible pellicle of organic life that covers the planet on which we live. The wretched intellectual biped, mistakenly called a human being, fatally carries the moon within himself. He carries it in his ego and in his protoplasmic lunar bodies. The entire mechanization of the Earth is governed by the moon, and disgracefully, the rational animal is nothing more than a machine. Only through the revolution of the consciousness is it possible to become absolutely liberated from this lunar mechanization. The moon is that great apocalyptic harlot that every intellectual beast carries within. This perverse race of Adam is 100% lunar. This lunar race mortality hates the solar race, the sons of the sun, the prophets, the masters of wisdom. Lunar multitudes crucified Christ, poisoned Buddha, incarcerated and calumniated Cagliostro, gave venom to Milarepa, burned Joan of Arc, betrayed the omnicosmic and very sacred avatar Ashiata Shemash and destroyed his work, etc. The great war between the solar and lunar races in the submerged Atlantis was marvelously chanted by the Orientals in their Mahabharata. Traditions state that such a war endured for many thousands of years. This war, made up of a series of wars, lasted for centuries, and started about 800,000 years ago. According to the secret doctrine, this is the date which the first of the three Atlantean catastrophes occurred. The second catastrophe occurred 200,000 years ago. These wars ended with the third and last catastrophe related to Poseidoni's Island in front of Gades, which happened about 11,000 years ago. People have a more or less befuddled memory of this latter catastrophe and its deluge. The Garden of Hesperides, which was the most powerful initiatic center of the good law of Atlantis, was frightfully hated by the lunar race. The Atlantean evil magic from the Black Islands was exceedingly frightful. The moon is the black and smoking mirror. Black magic is lunar. The left-handed adepts, the black magicians, normally live in the sublunar regions of the submerged mineral kingdom within the infernal worlds. Schools, sects, and orders of a lunar type mortally hate white tantrism. Very ancient Kabbalistic traditions state that Adam had two wives, Lilith and Nehema. Both wives represent lunar infrasexuality. Lilith is the mother of abortions, pederasty, homosexuality, masturbation, hatred of sex, and every type of vice that performs great violence to nature. Nehema symbolizes adultery, sexual abuse, passionate fornication, and lust. Infrasexuality is the foundation of perverse lunar magic. Infrasexuality reigns with sovereignty in the sublunar regions of the submerged mineral kingdom. Within the sublunar regions, Dante found the lustful Empress Semiramis, who in vice of luxury was so shameless that she made pleasure lawful by public decree. It is written that Empress Semiramis succeeded Ninus her espoused and held the land which was ruled by an ancient Soldan. Within the sublunar regions, Dante also found the woman who in amorous fury slew herself, and then broke her faith to Sychaeus' ashes. He also found the beautiful Helen and Cleopatra, the lustful queen. Within the infernal worlds, under the faint light of the new moon, Dante found the infamous Brunetto Latini and many other degenerated homosexual henchmen of Lilith. Chapter 18. Limbo. Beloved Gnostic brethren, on this Christmas night of 1967, I want you to know that all of the known and unknown caves form a broad and uninterrupted web which embraces the planet Earth in its entirety. These caves constitute the Orco of the classic Greeks, the limbo of Christian esoterists, in short, the other world in which we live after death. Dante Alighieri found limbo in the first circle of the infernal worlds or inferior worlds. Indeed, we can emphatically affirm that limbo is the region of the dead, the molecular world. Blasphemies and complaints from condemned souls are never heard within limbo, only sighs. These sighs are the outcome of grief without torment. Sighs that are uttered by a multitude of men, women, and children, whose entrance into the kingdom was not possible. It is urgent that you, beloved Gnostic brethren, know that the souls that are in limbo did not sin, and if they had sinned, they have repented. Some of these souls, while still physically alive, had acquired many merits and virtues, beauty and innocence. However, these elements were not enough in order to attain entrance into the kingdom. They lacked the main requirement, the work with the spermatic waters of existence. They did not know the Arcanum AZF, the Sahaja Methuna, or sexual magic. If somebody had talked to them about it, they only rejected it, believing that they could enter into the kingdom without the waters of baptism. It is relevant to clarify once and for all, beloved brethren, that baptism clearly and specifically symbolizes the sexual work with the ens seminis, within which the whole ens virtutis of the fire is found in a potential state. The baptismal font symbolizes sex, within which the spermatic waters of the first instant are contained. The philosophical stone of ancient medieval alchemists, upon which we must edify our interior temple, is sex. Peter, the great master of sex, said, "Behold, I lay in Shaun a chief cornerstone, elect, precious. And he that believeth on it shall not be confounded. Unto you therefore, which believe he is precious, but unto them which be disobedient, the stone which the builders disallowed, the same is made the head of the corner, and a stone of stumbling, and a rock of offense." 1 Peter 1 verses 6-8. Whosoever wants to ascend must first of all descend, this is the law. Remember that sex is a stone of stumbling, and a rock of offense. It is urgent to descend into the ninth sphere, sex, in order to work with the water and the fire, origin of worlds, beasts, human beings and gods. Every authentic white initiation begins there. Since ancient times, the descent into the ninth sphere was the highest trial to prove the supreme dignity of the Hierophant. Jesus, Hermes, Buddha, Muhammad, Moses, the Holy Lama, etc. had to pass through this difficult ordeal. It is urgent to build the solar bodies in the flaming forge of Vulcan. One is prohibited to assist the Lord's banquet with lunar bodies, beggars' clothing. Into the flaming forge of Vulcan, into the ninth sphere, Mars descends in order to retemper his flaming sword and conquer the heart of Venus. Hermes descends in order to clean the stables of Augeas with the sacred fire. Perseus descends in order to cut off the head of Medusa. Within limbo, Dante found many innocent children, patriarchs and illustrious men who never descended into the ninth sphere. Thus, for no other evil they are condemned. Their affliction is to live in constant desire without any hope. Many people with the highest of values live in limbo, and their only crime is that they have not built their solar bodies. Dante also found in limbo supremely famous poets such as Homer, Naso, and Flaccus the satirist. Thus, while floating in limbo, Dante arrived at the foot of a magnificent castle, which was surrounded 7 times by lofty walls. Around the castle there was a pleasant stream which defended it. Thus, he passed through 7 gates, until he came upon a meadow with fresh lively verdure, where he found austere sages of great authority. Unfortunately, they were all dressed with lunar bodies. Within limbo, Dante found Electra accompanied by many, among whom he recognized Hector and Anchises' pious son, Aeneas. Within limbo, Dante found Camilla and Penthesilea and the good old King Latinus seated by his child Lavinia. Within limbo, Dante found Brutus, he who chased Tarquin out of Rome, Lucretia, and Marcia, with Julia and Cornelia, and also, soul apart retired, the Soldan fierce. Within limbo, Dante also found Socrates and Democritus, who pretended that the world was originated by chance. He also found Diogenes, with Heraclitus, and Empedocles, and Anaxagoras, and Thales' sage, Zeno, all of them very wise. Nonetheless, they were all dressed with beggars' clothing, with lunar bodies. Within limbo, Dante found Dioscorides, the observer of quality, as well as the moralist Seneca, the geometrist Euclid and Ptolemy, and many other wise men from this lunar race. Within limbo live many just men who worked for humanity and who dissolved the eye. Yet, they committed the mistake of not building their solar bodies. One becomes astonished when one sees Mahatma Gandhi dressed with lunar bodies and living within limbo. On a certain occasion, after having verified that the sacred fire had never ascended throughout the dorsal spine of Mahatma Gandhi, it was not inconvenient for me to address him and tell him the following: "You are without realization." He answered, "I did not have time for that." My final answer was, "That excuse is not just." Indeed, Mahatma Gandhi could have built solar bodies in the flaming forge of Vulcan, sex, because he had a magnificent wife. However, he committed the mistake of abstinence. He believed that he could reach self-realization by renouncing sex. He was a sincere but mistaken soul. I also found Yogananda within a temple of limbo. He was dressed with lunar bodies. He honestly believed himself to be self-realized. When I let him see his mistake, when I told him, "You are not self-realized." Full of great amazement, he then tried to start a discussion with me. Thus, the intervention of the superior master of the temple was necessary in order for him to comprehend his situation. I will never regret the fact of having warned the great yogi, the noble Yogananda, that if he ever wants to enter into the kingdom, he has to reincorporate himself again into this physical world and get married. Thus, by working in the ninth sphere, he can build his solar bodies. Within limbo there live thousands of holy hermits, sublime yogis and noble mystics who felt disgusted by sex and who innocently believed that they could enter into the kingdom with lunar bodies. Limbo is the region of innocence, of those mystics, saints, penitents who did not know the great arcanum, the Mithuna. If they did know about it, they rejected it, because they very honestly believed that based only on sexual abstinence, pranayamas, penitences, yogic exercises, etc., would they attain self-realization. This is why Peter stated that sex is a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. Thousands of pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist schools exist within limbo. These schools impart sublime knowledge onto their affiliated souls. Their knowledge does not harm anyone. On the contrary, it benefits everybody. Nonetheless, their knowledge, unfortunately, does not aid in their intimate self-realization, because these schools do not teach the gospel of Peter, the Sahaja Mithuna. Thus, only Mercury, the messenger of the gods, the archmagus with his caduceus of Mercury, a symbol of the dorsal spine within which the two serpents named Ida and Pingla are entwined, can by means of Mithuna, evoke to a new life those unhappy souls who have precipitated into limbo. Many have departed from within limbo, the soul of our first father and Abel his child, Noah the righteous man, Moses the lawgiver, the patriarch Abraham, King David, Israel with his father and with his sons, and with Rachel. All of these souls had to reincorporate into the physical world in order to work in the ninth sphere, to build their solar bodies. This is how they achieved the second birth. Now they are angels of an indescribable splendor. One is full of amazement when conversing with the angel Israel, all of the sublime V. Verses of the Old Testament harmoniously resound within his solar aura. Thank you for listening.